You are listening to a piece of the Salasin.10 podcast area. You are listening to a piece of the Salasin.10 podcast area.
Viewership is going down. Facebook and Google are taking a lot of money, and you guys are reading cat memes and sex news. So I think one of the things that the Institute of Journalists wants to do is to improve the standards of media today, which is why we work with NIEP and we get involved in organizing today's amazing forums and debates, right?
So do I have to
and the thing that really gives me hope today is seeing the amount of bums on chairs today, like in front here to listen to, four old guys talk about media. Three old guys talk about media, and it's been amazing. And we really enjoyed it. I feel like now it's time to let the younger guys have a little bit more of a voice. So ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, I would invite the big star. Thank you so much for coming in. It means a lot to us to have you guys here and listening to these talks and hopefully getting some good insights about what is happening in Malaysian media. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to thank you all of the NIEP, the media, and the rest of the you guys have done an amazing job. Thank you so much for the applause for NIEP for organizing a week of Thank you.
Should I take a picture of both of you?
Yeah, you too. This is Shannon.
Where we unpack issues on freedom of speech, freedom of association, and essentially any form of us saying things so that we are heard. With that being said, before we start with the few exciting events that's happening today, i.e. the public debate, the forums, and many other things, I would like to first invite the Chief Executive Officer of the Malaysian Institute for Debate in Public Speaking to say a few words to everyone. Please welcome her.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. So a lot of people ask us usually what is weekend of knowledge evolution, and to know that you have to understand a little bit about MIDP. So MIDP stands for the Malaysian Institute for Debate and Public Speaking. So we are an educational institution that focuses on human capital development, and we do that through the development and promotion of leadership and soft skills. So we work with really young children, as young as 7 years old, all the way to adults. We have like a 40+ year old at our center and things like that. We have four main operations. We have training, we do events, we do consultancy, as well as advocacy. Our programs are endorsed by the Ministry of Education. So what we do is we provide training, and we have 5 courses at our center. It's run like a school. Things are divided into semesters. You have an assessment at the end and things like that. So we have about 250 students enrolled at our center every year. And once they graduate, they either go to a more challenging course or they go to a higher level course. So, because for debating, we have like beginner, intermediate, and advanced. On top of that, events, we do like national level competitions for public speaking and debating. And these competitions are also endorsed by the Ministry of Education. On top of that, we do consultancy. So consultancy is basically the kind of work that we do with our partners that are interested to bring debating out there, or partners who are interested to lobby for their own causes, but by using debating and public speaking as a tool to engage with the public. Weekend of Knowledge Evolution is an example of an advocacy program that we run. So the main objective of work is to get you guys to be able to watch a debate, and also to bring the issues outside of the debating community, because the debating community is pretty tight and we usually have events just amongst ourselves. So Weekend of Knowledge Evolution is one of those times when we bring these events out for the public. And this is actually the first time we're doing this like really outside, because usually we do events like this in universities and things like that. I just want to address a few misconceptions about debating because you will see some of the top debaters, not just in Malaysia but also in Asia, who will be debating on a topic about government's power to issue printing and publication licenses. A lot of people usually ask us at MITP, is it true that if I have two kids and one is more extroverted than the other, I should send my kid who is more extroverted to debating and probably the other one who's a bit shy to a class like ballet or like piano or whatever? We don't believe that at MITP because the skills that we focus on at MITP, they are four. They are communication skills, critical thinking, creative thinking, as well as character building. These four things are skills. They are not talent. That means they can be taught to children, to people, and especially when these children are not, are not extroverted, it's even more important than to teach them those skills so that they have the necessary skills, to go get a job, pass an interview, go to an Ivy League universities, all that they want in their lives, right? So we are very, very proud today to have the debaters here with us, and we have an event lined up throughout the entire day until 5 p.m. So you can watch this debate first, and then you can come back after lunch later for a debate and another forum with some of the top media practitioners in Malaysia. So for after lunch, we will have the GM of Karangcraft, Editor-in-Chief of Malaysia Kini, we have the editor of Astro Awani and the senior editor of The Star, as well as the chairman of Institute of Journalists Malaysia himself, who will be here and talk about the issue of sustainability and funding in media agencies. So I hope you guys will come back. Is everyone okay? You guys look so serious and scaring me a little bit. Right? Everyone's okay, right? Okay, that's great. I don't want to waste your time anymore. Our team will be here if you have more questions about MITP, about our classes, about our events. This is Izzat. This is Vishal. At the back there is Wesley. Yes, he's saying hi. Hi, Wesley. And this is Azim. So we're all from MITP, and if you have questions, we are more than happy to have a chat with you, and I don't take more of your time, so please enjoy the debate. Thank you.
Alright, so some of you may wonder what are the debaters going to be debating about later. For those of you who just dropped in, they're going to be debating about that the government should not have the power to issue printing and publication licenses. Considering how important information is to all of us, considering how much of an impact information has for our daily lives, I just want to get a feel of the entire room. Who here thinks that the government should be allowed to say or to give out licenses for printing and publication? Raise their hands. Who thinks that the government should be allowed to give out licenses to print and to publish? Okay, who thinks that the government shouldn't have that power? And that maybe like a third power should have that ability? Alright, so now it is the job of the debaters to convince you otherwise. So with that, I'd like to start the debate. I'd like to invite the 6 speakers to please come to the front and take their seats. Please give them a round of applause, everyone. Right, so for your information, the government bench will be represented by Daniel Mak from Taylor's University, Sarah Shafiq from the German-Malaysian Institute, and Danish Agarwal from University of Malaya. And on the opposition bench, we have Iman Hassan from University Technology Mara, Rinakshi Rams from Sunway College, and Azim Nazri from University Technology Mara. And with that, we will start the debate. So, I'd like to say a few things about the first speaker that will be speaking later, the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister is Daniel Mak. He is 22 years old. He is currently studying International Business and Marketing at Taylor's University. And when I asked him, what is something interesting about you that you'd like the audience to know? He said he is actually opening a cafe business in Taylor's University, which will see its grand opening tomorrow. So feel free to just talk to him about his cafe, and we're very happy to have you tomorrow, so please keep your eyes open on that. With that being said, I'd like to invite the Honourable Prime Minister to open the debate. Hear, hear.
should be careful of the Malaysia that you're in right now. You, the government, is one that's cracking down on you. It doesn't give you the full right or autonomy. Full right or autonomy to speak up. Here's the big problem that we have today. We would posit on side government that there's too much control of the media. I'm going to give you guys some information about what's going on in society right now. I'm going to talk to you about the Printing Presses and Publication Act of 1984. So this act is basically, it basically gives discretion to the Home and Affairs Minister to basically have the full discretion to revoke, to give you the license, or to suspend your license when it comes to media and publication. We see that there are by and large many uses of this, especially from our previous government or as for the past few decades, that was to restrict political discourse, to silence opposing political parties, or to manipulate the news to consumers so that we get different news or we get a manipulated version of that. It might not be the case in all governments to abuse this power, we understand, but its potential to be weaponized is something that we must fear in itself already, and for that reason, we would oppose it. How would we approach this debate inside government? We would do a few things as a solution, our policy. Ideally, we would have governments that will not possess the right to license at all. These would be delegated to third-party neutral bodies that will assess whether people or any news agency should have the right to publish or the right to publish any news or media articles. But secondly, here's how these neutral bodies would conduct themselves. They would firstly have accuracy checks on their own, where it will be more accurate and less biased because it's not supported or funded by the government. But secondly, it would have limit sensitivity to any news outlets if they were ever to be discriminatory or incite hate speech, right? You don't want people going around, calling people by racial slurs. So this is our best effort to curb that. But lastly, all these activities are a measure of the news agency's right to bear the license. There's a similar policy that's enacted in the United Kingdom and India, so you can do a little more research if you're interested in this a little more, yeah? So basically, what we're trying to establish is a more trustworthy equivalent of a credit rating agency or like a election committee where they're neutral and they intervene in the situation where it comes to licensing as a whole. My first argumentation. I'm going to talk to you about why all media outlets have a right to their reporting perspective. The first thing we have to note is that it's the media's duty to convey the news to the best of their target audience's wishes to receive it. This means that whether you're right-wing or left-wing, conservative or liberal, poor or rich, there's a niche perspective that the news agency always wishes to promote a topic or promote an argument or promote a discussion or article to you. So meaning, because it was the way that this news media article interpreted the events that happened around you, they have a right to report it the exact way they saw it, and you have no right to revoke that license just because that is the case, or you don't like how they're reporting it, or doesn't make you look good as a government as a whole. It has to be neutral and it has to be transparent. That's the bottom line of it. But let's see it this way. The failure to allow this to happen is the entrenchment on individual views, meaning you are literally saying that, no, we don't like the way you think, you have no right to think like that, therefore you cannot tell people what your news article is about. So we think that's quite unfair as a standard if you're going to be a government and you're going to try to entrench your views onto people. The bottom line is that people deserve a right to report their perspective because it was their true account and experience of the event and issue. Before I move on, I'll take a question.
On your side, would you have advocacy journalism, which means news reported together with an author or a journalist's opinion?
So, yes, we can have that if you have the license from a neutral body. The bottom line is just that you don't have to be discriminatory in any way. You can report news however you want to, just that it has to come from a perspective that's true to you as well. That's what we want to champion. My second argument, I'll talk to you about why it hurts the manner of discussion that we experience as people, right? So if your government is solely in charge of licensing or giving you the right to post news articles and whatnot, then we suggest that media companies could feel threatened because they may feel like they would lose their license if they ever were to report something that is not favorable to the government, right? We've seen this happen before. So let's just put it this way, that it's the imminent threat of having a revoked license that media companies would not want to report inaccurate or bad news to people. So for example, the Bersih rally, you remember that from a few years ago, the Bersih rally had about thousands of people coming over, but the news agencies at that time would always report a few 200 people, 400 people, and they would always report it in a sense where they caused havoc, right? These things are untrue, but because you have the government that controls the media, that's why they want to paint this perspective through the news, which is extremely unfair and unright to the real events that happen overall. Any effort to stay true as a media company to its purpose leads to the revocation of your license. That is unfair, right? We would suggest this. It is not true that status quo allows enough room for media companies to defend themselves, right? So the Printing Press and Publication Act actually claims that they will give these companies enough time to keep their license if they go through the procedure and give them the right to defend themselves. Very often, we've seen this being abused by the government, right? The way they use it is just a mere formality. They would stretch out the time and they would still revoke your license anyway, even after you've defended yourself, which is very unfair, especially for the Star News, as you guys would have remembered from long ago. That doesn't exist anymore because the government was extremely pernicious in the way that they nitpicked the Star News and decided to revoke them for one single article that they felt was not in line with the way the government saw things. That is extremely unfair. But what about individuals? Individuals would feel as if they would lose their freedom if they couldn't voice out. We are living in a community that's crumbling, exasperated, and we don't know where to look for discussion. I will say this, it is not easy to have discussion overall. It's not easy to talk about racial views, but it is the environment that Malaysia deserves and we expect from our Malaysia Baru. And for all these reasons, I'm very proud to propose that these media licenses ought to keep their licenses and publish whatever they want because it's their true perspective of the Malaysia we are living in today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for that speech. Now, to respond to the Prime Minister, we have the Leader of Opposition, and that person is Iman Hassan. She is 22 years old. She's currently pursuing a degree in electronic engineering at University Technology Mara. And when I asked, what is something interesting about you that you would like the audience to know? She said, I like to cook, and I make really good carbonara and tom yum. With that being said, I'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition to continue the debate. Hear, hear.
There are a lot of government structures that can be abused by governments. Governments can abuse police enforcement, governments can abuse arms and weapons and armor, governments can abuse the law and the judicial body, but that doesn't mean that we take away the power for governments to control the structures. Because ultimately, what you ruin is the ability for governments to regulate our society and to protect the most vulnerable individuals within our society. At this point of the debate, I'm not sure how exactly side government can show us how exactly they are able to regulate yellow journalism or journalism that disseminate information that is false or incite hate and radical ideas. Let's be very clear what the policy and regulation in our world is. The first is that you would have to apply to the Ministry of Home Affairs
and they would have the power to grant, revoke, or suspend the permits. But for you to be granted a license, it would be very simple. You would only have to register your establishment, pay a very reasonable amount of money to the government, and accept to be under the scrutiny of the government. The only way for your establishment to have your license revoked or suspended is only if your publication was outrightly endangering national security interests and causing incredible amount of social unrest. Because otherwise, we would always allow establishments to publicize and release information as normal as possible. But the last thing is that if your establishment publishes something without a license, you either get jailed or pay out a substantial amount of fine. The reason why this is important for us to understand is that the barrier of entry for you to get a license is not that high, but the ability for governments to regulate and to ensure that there are not many enterprises that are able to give out false information as well as give out radical information to the public is something that we exclusively have under our side house. But what did side government tell us? They tell us that, oh, we're going to have a license given out by independent entities. The first response that I have to this is that I think the side government was principally inconsistent. Because if they say that governments have a risk of abusing this power, we are unsure whether or not this independent entity also have a risk of not being neutral and also abusing their power as well. We have no idea who this entity is, what are this entity made up of, so we are unsure whether or not they have the same account, whether or not we are able to hold them to the same account as governments. Why is then entities that are led by governments better? The first reason is that it is accountable and answerable to its people. So insofar as individuals on the ground feel that governments are abusing this power or governments are being unfair in terms of regulating the enterprises that get these licenses, then we are able to vote out those same governments and vote out those ministers who are abusing these powers. This is something that people on the ground exclusively have under our side of the house that we don't have when it comes to independent neutral parties that they want to support under their side. So I'll ask you 3 questions in this speech. The first question is, will governments abuse this regulation in the first place? I think the claim that came from Prime Minister was untrue, because I don't think governments would abuse this, right? Even during the BN era, the Star has always been critical of the government and has always had a lot of opinion pieces that were controversial. They wanted to say, but the Star had their license revoked once upon a time. But the only time they got their license revoked was because it was justified and they went against the standards of journalism that were supposed to be upheld in Malaysia. But the second reason is that we must understand the context of Malaysia right now. We have significantly progressed since 20 to 30 years ago. The evidence of this is many. The fact that we have huge crackdown on corruption led by Latifah Koya, the fact that we have large amounts of youth-led progressive movements, that we have grassroots movements, and recently we had Undi 18 that was passed unanimously in both Dewan Rakyat and Dewan Negara. These are huge progresses that show to you that the government that we have right now in Malaysia is likely not going to abuse the power that they have. So we don't think the characterization that was brought out by Prime Minister was right. So I have 2 arguments in my arguing to you. The first is why freedom of speech is not an absolute right, and why in principle governments should have the power to regulate it. And secondly, why printing and publication license maintains genuine and credible news. I think the first thing we must understand is that the state's duty is always to protect the rights of individuals who live under the care. So it's also the state's duty to mediate between different interests of rights of individuals. So recognizing that, why does the state have the power to give out this license? While it is true that everyone here in this room has the right to give out your opinions and to speak your mind, you must also understand there must be a certain limit to your freedom, particularly when your freedom of speech conflicts and infringes on other people's freedoms and liberties. So that's why you see governments in Europe such as Germany, Austria and Hungary freedom of speech. But secondly, why is it that we are able to maintain credible news? The first is that what would their world look like under their standards? Two things. The first is that it will be a free market of journalist companies. Ultimately, they will compete with each other and sensationalize journalism and make sure that they are able to give out information that is sensationalized or possibly exaggerated to get as many views as possible. So what they do is they give out false information, they exaggerate, and they do clickbait headlines. This harms the dissemination of information and things. Sure.
Can you tell us why a government would have no incentive to change the news or manipulate it in order to keep its power and relevancy as compared to a neutral body that has no stake or incentive in it to retain any power whatsoever?
So the reason why governments don't have incentive today is because news and media has completely changed before 20, 30 years ago. We have other accountability measures that are not just print media, that we allow them to hold governments accountable. So we think ultimately we can hold governments accountable. Before I finish my speech, I want everyone in this room to look at introspect your life and realize that there are many people in our lives that aren't able to differentiate fake news and real news. We think these are the individuals that we have to protect so that they don't feed into young journalism. We're very proud to.
Thank you very much to the Leader of Opposition for their speech. Now, to extend the case of the government, we have the Deputy Prime Minister. Now, let me just say a few things about this person. Her name is Sarah Muhammad Shafiq. She is 19 years old. She's currently pursuing her A-levels at the German-Malaysian Institute. And when asked something interesting about you that you'd like the audience to know, she said, "Growing up, I wanted to be a rock star, but that's pretty impossible. Then I discovered math and physics, which actually happens to be just as fun. I have now come to terms that I'll be happy even when I'm not a rock star." Let's give it up to Sarah Shafiq, the Deputy Prime Minister.
The might of words and the might of thought is probably one of the greatest gifts God has given us. The ability to think and the ability to give out information is something that only happens well on side of government. We believe in a world where you are capable of giving out information and having the best discourses. We think a world in which discourse is limited is a world where you are only boxed into what the government wants you to believe in rather than what actually happens. I'll talk to you two things in my speech. The first is why licenses in status quo is bad, and secondly why a world with licenses that are easily accessible is preferable. But before that, a couple of responses. So the first thing that Iman wanted to tell you is that, guys, independent parties are not neutral. We prefer governments because we can vote them out. I think the first thing to note is, if all independent parties are exactly not neutral, then I don't think we should have the election committee. I don't think we should have any forms of bodies to regulate things that happen. And that's inherently bad, because governments are more likely going to abuse this power, as Daniel told you. But even more than that, assuming we are capable of voting them out, we never really told us how. Because we would think, in that side of the house, the world would look like this. Governments are actively going to restrict information. What they will be telling you is that the government is good, therefore there's really no necessity for us to be voted out. What this means is, on the comparative, we would have more counter narratives and we have more discourses in which we are able to critique the government. And that's the world in which your governments will be easily voted out compared to your side of the house. But then they told you that, hey, it's good, we have progressed. It took us 30 years. We are now capable of talking. We have now cracked down certain parts of the government. We think it's far better on our side of the house. If it took you 30 years, in worldwide information is easily accessible, it will take you 10 years. It will take you far easier and far faster for you to get those forms of achievement. If it's true, it took us 30 years, then the question now becomes, how do we get it faster? We think that's a world in which we provide the obvious answer. A world in which you are able to access the most amount of information. But then they told you that free market journalism
journalism is bad? How do you necessarily quantify what is true and not? So we would say, assuming there are 20 news outlets and 17 of those outlets report the same thing, then you could necessarily identify that these three news outlets are pretty much inaccurate or pretty much not the most legitimate or the most verified. So I think there's a natural check and balance within the free journalism market. But even more than that, the specific nuance in having free journalism is the idea that there will be some truths that will be cracked down by the government in your world, because there will be a lot of government cover-ups that will not be able to be known by the public. That is only a world in which government provides, in which everyone is capable of giving out information, and the truth will be able to prevail in that side of the house. Before I move on, sure.
So just to be clear, you're okay with everything we stand for here, except that the government shouldn't be able to decide what's allowed or not allowed.
Yeah, naturally, because we think that the government is restrictive in nature, and I'll talk more on how licenses with regards to government is bad my implementation. But let's look back at what Daniel told you, which was really important in this debate. He told you that there is a principle of duty of media to give out information. But what it also means is that you should not restrict people's thoughts, that everyone's ability to talk should be entertained and should be one that is heavily celebrated by the public. But even more than that, it's principally wrong for you to hold these publications ransom when you have the ability to revoke their licenses. What this means is you literally push them into a corner to talk about the things that only you want to talk about. Therefore, you limit their freedom and you disallow their ability to talk about the things which are naturally important, the things which people naturally look away from. These are taboos which have the necessity to be talked about within status quo that only happens in our side of the house. The star was suspended for 7 months and the age doesn't exist anymore. In that 7 months, this void of counter information means that individuals literally had no access to things which weren't government related or government endorsed. What this means is literally 7 months of you losing probably the truth and losing probably one of the most important parts of history. And this is something we cannot stand for. That the truth should always prevail and should always be accessible towards individuals on the ground. Now to my arguments. Why licenses in status quo are bad? Firstly, there is a necessity to be friendly towards the state. This happens in two ways. The first, in not only gaining that license, but secondly, in maintaining that license. So what this means is, the way you write will probably be very soft and not very critiquey of the government. Because if the government doesn't like it, they will not be the ones to give you the license. Because why would I give license to a publication that would mean I would be actively voted out? It just doesn't make any sense. The comparative that we provide on our side of the house is, in a world where you have independent parties, they are the ones who will identify in manner of language whether or not it's tact or whether or not it's harmful towards individuals on the ground, but also still maintaining the information that is important for individuals to receive. We think the comparative on that side of the house is you only get clamped down worse. But secondly, the perception of not being legitimate without a license. In the side of opposition, it's extremely hard for you to get a license if you're not endorsed or if you don't actively do things in which the government likes. So we think the comparative that we provide is far better. In a world where it's very easy for you to get license, it's far easier for you to be able to produce and bring out to the masses blogs or even articles that heavily critique the government. These are things that won't exist on side of opposition. But even more than that, the reason why that's important is in maximizing access, what you do is you give the voice to the to the minorities and to the people who have the least amount of voice. What this means is within status quo, I think the procedures, while there are parts that are true, it's far easier when you are rich and when you have fame on your side. So it's far harder for minorities to be able to gain access towards publication licenses. In a world where you have an independent party that's able to look out for these individuals, then they are the ones who will help them get the publication. We think the right to express your information is a right that everyone should have and should not only be limited to the amount of money or the amount of fame that you have. Therefore, we think it's far better on our side of the house. But lastly, we think when you limit the dynamics of reporting, that's where people are more likely going to revolt and people are more likely going to start asking more questions. We think publications should actively go and search into grey areas and should actively go into search of finding the correct truth and not only being limited by the government. To be boxed off your thought is probably one of the biggest tortures that you could ever have. We think individuals should be able to access
Thank you very much to the Deputy Prime Minister for their speech. Now to extend the case of the opposition, we have the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Now this person, her name is Meenakshi Rams. She is 18 years old, pursuing the A-levels at Sunway College, and when asked something interesting about you that you'd like the audience to know, she said, and I quote, "I have caused the Russian bomb squad to take custody of my suitcase at a train station before." With that being said, I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
My citizenship rights shouldn't be up for discussion inside government's role. We don't think an independent body is able to take care of the welfare of racial harmony at best the same way that the government can. And that is what we stand for inside opposition. It's simple to say that we defend status quo, but we realize that maybe there are some flaws in the act that we have. For example, the total discretion to the Home Affairs Minister to suspend the license, right? I think these can be up for review, and it's much more likely to be changed in side opposition to the new government, where the parliament is more open in nature. We don't think you should completely remove the government's ability to permit publication licenses. Before I move on to my argument on the legitimacy of news, let's rebut and review some of the things that the government said. I think firstly, their entire policy of the independent body is one that is flawed to begin with. Because recognizing that there is potential for it to be corrupt itself is a same potential that we have inside government, right? The ability to be abused. Secondly, things like, and also if the government is abusing the power, we literally changed the government because of that. We literally had democratic protests. And here's the thing about independent bodies, we can parallel this directly to the United States, where you have literally so many publication sites, and there's an influx of information which literally harms discourse, because white supremacy is so prevalent in news sites like Breitbart, and it's constantly pushed towards people because of the fact that they have more money to print more articles. So we think that on that thing itself, we don't think that the independent body works. Secondly, I'll take one later. It's untrue to say that the Malaysian media or the journalism industry is one that is flawed, one that is pro-government at all times. Look at Star News in 1980s, Hindustan in 2015, and Malaysian TV, who's been fighting so hard to be pro-opposition for the last a few decades where BN was in power. All of these things exist, and all of these counter interactions exist, right? But thirdly, on this whole idea of minority publication license, that it's hard to get, right, if you're an Indian person wanting to start a publication company. It's super easy to register yourself as a company because you just have to pay the money. What's hard in most cases is maintaining your license. And the reason why people even suspend your license is because you go against the standards that are set. What are these standards, right? Firstly, things like talking about Jus Soli, talking about the Bumi Putra rights. These are things that will cause social unrest. Imagine racist people on Twitter quoting articles from legitimate news sites just to validate their racist opinions. These are the kinds of things that will happen on your side if you don't have a government regulating and understanding how societal's reaction to news sites generally are. You can see that even with the ICER case, right? But before I move on to my argument, sure.
But on your side, cases which are pro-ISIL are actively surrounding us. However, counter-narratives are very much little. We think on our side we provide more avenue for counter-narratives because governments will probably want to pander towards the majority, which is anti-ISIL.
So here's the thing about the majority-minority divide. It's always going to exist. We don't think that removing the government from media is going to defer this by a lot, right? Because you see in your side, if you're still going to have majority publication licenses, maybe rich majority individuals setting up publication sites and posting racist views with a few evidence backed by the majority, this means that minority people still probably won't get access to the media that you wanted to talk about. These issues are still going to exist. However, even if you call it a zero-sum game, the reason why your side is more harmful is because that independent body is unable to truly capture what society's reaction is towards certain media like the government can, because the government has more experience in going through it. For example, like after the 13 May incident, or after like so much of social unrest that caused the government harm, I think that's where they know better. So why should legitimacy of news be protected? Because it's in principle, right, where individuals have the right to know, and publication news sites have to preserve this right. So what happens when licenses are removed, right? Like, I think Iman's argument is so important about how when you have a free market journalism market, what's going to happen is that a lot of companies are going to sensationalize news, right? They want more people to click on their link sites, which means like the diluted information is going to be bombarded with more things like hyper-exaggerated things, right? By that in its own, journalism quality in Malaysia is going to decline. And in an era where Malaysia is literally up to 22 places in the media press freedom around the whole world, I think it's super important to protect how journalists or how media acts in our country, right? So because of that, we think that this proves that it isn't the licenses that causes media freedom to be suspended to begin with. We think it's the nature of government that's correctly pointed out by Iman. So even if you remove it, you can't really measure how the majority-minority dichotomy is going to be like. We think that there are still going to be racist things said, right? But at least now, if you're racist, you can't quote a Star News online article and say that, oh, my opinions are further validated. Secondly, why does it harm day-to-day people who are reading the news, right? Because now it's so much easier for people to get licenses or by the independent body itself. We think it's harder for people to gain accurate information because of the fact that like there are more companies in general, that means there's just more articles, there's more news, so we play the numbers here, right? Every time you go on Facebook, it's going to be so many articles, it's hard for you to filter out, it's hard for you to fact check these articles, hard for you to know which political party you should vote in the next election. And because of the very idea of the big data and the fact that you only see articles that tender to your own views, which means it's so much harder for like private companies. Private companies only want to tender to your views so that they can get the clicks and likes on their articles, which means that you don't correctly get all the neutral news that side government wants to push to you. If you want in Malaysia that has regulated journalism, no thank you, go with side opposition.
Thank you very much, Rina, for that speech. Now, to wrap up the substantive portion of the government bench, we have the government whip. A few things about this person. His name is Danesh Ram Agarwal. He's 21 years old, currently pursuing an undergraduate degree in law at the University of Malaya. And when asked something interesting about you that you'd like the audience to know, he said he is an 8th grade violinist. Now, with that being said, I'd like to invite the government whip. Here.
I agree that the principles to a freedom of speech is not absolute. But ask yourself, do you need the permission of the government before you speak? Do you need the permission of the government before you make a statement whenever you want to air your grievances? That is the right that we have protected since we built the constitution. And that is the right that said government is fighting for. Before I go into the two important questions of today's debate, I just want to get rid of all the non-contentious things that have been mentioned in this debate. Firstly, the Printing and Publications Act in 1984 does not adhere to online media because you don't need a publication license to produce content on the internet, right? So all these ideas about journalism online, about links on Facebook does not hold water in today's debate because the Home Ministry has no jurisdiction to give them a license because they don't even get a license. And all these harms about yellow journalism, about fake news media, all of these things also don't exist because under both sides, they are not registered. You cannot take a license from an institution that isn't registered. And that's essentially what side government is fighting for. In our world, there's going to be the same number of companies, there's going to be the same number of entities and bodies. It's the difference maker is that your licenses is granted by an independent body as opposed to a government. So all these ideas about fake news, yellow journalism will exist on both sides. How we counter against that is through acts by the Defamation Act, by enshrining the Constitution and civil suits, not by the Printing and Publication Act, not by the government institutions by themselves, right? So getting that out of the way, what are the two important questions that we need to answer? The first, is government capable and is government good? I think the main thrust of opposition's case has been independent bodies cannot be trusted, independent bodies are devout to corruption. The same reason is given to governments. I think this has been explained and analyzed well by government. But extending better is that the fact that government has so many responsibilities, the fact that government has shown to be more abusive and corrupt in the past means that it is more likely for us to believe in independent institutions to grant these licenses better. I think this is the comparative that the opposition must answer. Because it is not enough to simply state independent organizations are prone to corruption without first providing analysis and links as to why that is true and before providing why that comparative is better. We told you when Star was suspended in 1984 for 7 months, not because it harmed the threats of our society, but because it produced content that was against the government. When The Edge was suspended in 2012, it was suspended because of 300 articles in regards to IMDb. And Zahid Hamidi, the Home Minister, threatened to suspend that news media because it had absolute discretion. So when they tell you that they only suspend based on standards, that standards doesn't exist in the BPPA. In the BPPA, it is complete to the discretion of the Home Minister. You are banking on the Home Minister being benevolent and being good. We are banking on the ideas of free speech and principles that we have upholded since we gained independence. Make that choice. I think it's obvious to say that the Constitution is something I'd rather believe in than a Home Minister being good. But before that, sure.
So all of your examples are from 20 to 50 years ago or from the previous government. Can you debate right now, the government that we have right now, why is it that there is still likelihood to abuse the power?
Like I told you, the principles that we are protecting are absent or are independent from how good your government is. An independent body back then would have been better, an independent body now is better. That's it. Forever and also, that is the price that we are willing to defend. If BN comes into power in the next election cycle, what are you going to do? Vote an entire government out just because they have abused over publication licenses. That didn't happen 60 years ago. We voted BN out because of the massive corruption that they had in all aspects of government. It's unlikely for me to accept that I will only vote for any government that is good in publication licenses. I think you need to prove why that is likely and why that is better. It's a comparative. That's what debate is about, right? Now going into the second argument about who maintains credible news better. I think it is also important to understand the experience that what governments are capable and what independent authorities are. Giving charity to side opposition, the PPPA has been reformed. It is now where the Home Ministry, when they choose to expedite or remove or suspend the publication licenses, companies have the opportunity to defend themselves. This happened in the Star and Malaysia TV 2 years ago. The problem with this is, the Star and Malaysia TV was only removed from suspension because of procedure, not because of substance. That means if the Home Ministry continues to follow every single procedure to protect his or her discretion, that publication will still cease to exist. And I bring you back the Supreme Court case that happened in 2014, Malaysia TV against the Home Minister. In that case, the judge argued that your ability to promote free press is just as important as your ability to have the freedom of expression, as protected in the Constitution in Article 10. This means one thing. It means that it's extremely valuable to us to be able to have publication licenses to be granted at any opportunity possible. Our side, even though we have a barrier, that barrier is given by an independent body, just like the Election Commission. They asked a question and they tell you that the government controls and may be corrupt in the police force. may be corrupt in the education system. Does that mean we replace them with independent bodies? I think that's outside or that's being completely disingenuous to the case of opposition. The election committee, because we recognize their interests from the government to protect their power, we create an independent body. We recognize that the corruption and anti-corruption committee, if controlled by the government, may mean they have promoted their own interests. Similarly, publication and media is extremely valuable to the Malaysian population. It shapes our values, it shapes our ideas, it shapes our thoughts. If the government has complete control to decide when and where I can take your license, when and where I can give your license, and when and where I can suspend your license, that means that the government may be prone to corruption more so than an international body. And that is a principle I will gladly defend as I continue standing on this podium. All in all, SAD government pushed for a very simple idea. Your ability to express freely is something that Malaysia protects. That same right is extended to publication licenses, and this is how we resolve that tension, and this is how we solve that problem. Very proud to be on government.
Thank you very much, Danesh, for that speech. Now, to end this debate, we have the opposition whip, Mr. Azim Nazri. He is 25 years old. He is currently pursuing a degree he graduated with a degree in communications, majoring in public relations. He is actually currently our programs development manager at MIDP, and he is an alumnus of University of Technology Mara. When asked, what is something interesting about you that you'd like the audience to know? He said, he will actively remind all of you that Qatar is pronounced as Qatar. Fun fact, but I just learned that. Alright, with that being said, I'd like to invite the opposition whip. Here.
The government bench wants and dreams of a Malaysia Baru, but they talk of Malaysia Lama. They make arguments that the government was oppressive in the 80s. Yes, in the 80s. They said that the government blocked and revoked the permits from the Edge and the Heat in 2015, not 2019 or 2018. The reality is that the government, the world, and the context upon which the media exists has changed, and we should realize that and argue based on the current definitions and how exactly the world runs. What are the things that they said before? First, they said that the government is extremely abusive and oppresses everyone else. You're only allowed to say nice things about the government, and you can never critique the government at all. Look, I know the Printing Press and Publications Act was built in 1984. That does not mean we're living in George Orwell's 1984. You are allowed to criticize the government. There does exist news organizations that is anti-government and is pro-opposition. The mere existence of Utusan in 2019 proves that you are able to say things that criticizes the government. The creation of the ability for people to criticize the government openly proves that you can do such things. And even then, we have more empowerment of the people. Firstly, the people are not aware and understand issues of human rights as well as issues of government abuse already. If they say that the people can't do anything because the government is too powerful, well, we changed governments last year. That proves that the people have the power to dictate the government. But secondly, they say that the government will never listen to us and people can never fight against what the government wants. Well, as far as I remember, the government was pro-ISID, but they pulled out because of anti-ISID voices that are against their views. So that proves that your anti-government voices or things that are against the government's pushes can function and can dictate what the government wants. And thirdly, we do have more empowerment of things like government check and balances. Things like the MSCC with the appointment of Latifah Koya, that she removed herself from PKR to prove her impartiality. And you know what existed from that? Is the ability for news organizations in the mainstream to criticize her because they think that she's not partial because they think that she's not impartial enough. That means that you can criticize the government, you can allow yourself to put yourself against the government, and you can criticize any actions. But here's the biggest problem with that case. They agree with 99% of everything we say, except one thing, that it is a neutral body. Who is this neutral body? What can they do? What is the difference of what we can or cannot talk about? None of this was explained. So we can't actually have that debate if they don't clarify that to us. Before I move on to another point of response, sure.
The criticisms of government and all of the benefits that you mentioned exist as well in independent community. Your burden is to prove why government is the best actor.
Okay, so I'll explain that later. But secondly, I also deal with the argumentation. But they say that there is potential for abuse. Well, yes, potential for abuse exists. But potential of abuse is not an argument. The potential is always there and it always will be. Tools of oppression can and will always exist. My right to own a knife to cook is my potential to stab someone with that knife does not mean that the government and for any of myself do not be able to hold those sorts of things. What we have on their world is essentially the US, where they have an ability for people to fight against what they want. But no, they don't want that because they want Malaysia but just no government. But still, what they do not have is things like a proper media council group that already exists, a standardized and codified code of ethics and conduct, a more empowered populace that's more able to take actions, things like hate speech laws that don't already exist in the country. And this all means that what they want to do is unlikely to succeed if it doesn't have the authority of the government. And even then, what they need to clarify is what are the values that their neutral bodies will want to have. Because these neutral bodies, do they care about national security? Do they care about national protection? Can you speak about things like women's rights? We don't know because they never clarified any of this. We don't know if they can speak about issues like top security or classified information. If it's an issue where the news agency is writing about what military secrets we got, how exactly can they speak on those things if it's fine for them to be able to discuss? I think there is some standard and some ability for the government to say that there is a reason and sometimes the government's interests are aligned, no thank you, with the needs and interests of the people. And thirdly, their issue is that the government is corrupt. I'll still take things down because of what Ram said. That there already exists a clear belief in Malaysians that perhaps the police is untrustworthy because they think that the police is corrupt, because they think that the police is a tool to oppress the people, and if you can pay enough coffee money for you to not pay most of your fines. But do we remove them completely? No, we regulate them, we ensure there's more partiality, we ensure we have more control, but we do not just give them away to a random neutral body that exists just because we think that they might be posed to be in danger. And that's what we're doing here. We are policing it, we are ensuring that these things can't be abused on our side. But secondly, because they say that we need the ability because UMNO might just win the next elections and things will go back. But they won't. They've seen what happens when you abuse the system. They've seen what happens when you oppress the people. And it's smart enough for them to realize that if you do that again, you will lose. That's what they're doing right now. They're criticizing the government, the current Pakatan Harapan government, because of their perceived impartiality. They criticize the appointment of Latifah Koya. They criticize the appointment of they criticize multiple ministers because they think that these ministers are not exactly neutral. They criticize the abilities for people in the current government to be fair because they can. And that means that they won't do that later because the moment they oppress the people or reverse the current policies, they are the next one to be taken down. And what we have shown last year was that all the media controls, all the text doesn't mean much if the people can vote you out. And that means that they have no reason to continue and reverse and backtrack on their actions. The conclusion of this debate is the conclusion of this debate on opposition is simple. No freedom is absolute and there are limits inherent in an organized government that knows and best understands and carries the people's interests in mind. That the state's interests may not necessarily be the same interest as your neutral organization's body. The state's interest is more aligned with the interests of your people. Under John Locke's social contract theory, we give away some rights for security, for liberty, and any discussions on rights is regarding where we draw the line. And on opposition, this is where we draw the line, with the government deciding who can have and is allowed to publish.
Alright, thank you very much, Azim, for that speech. Now, I'd like to ask the speakers and the debaters to just stay put, because we're going to have a conversation now. we're gonna have a conversation now, and we'd like to engage with members of the audience. So the way we're gonna have this conversation is I'm gonna open the floor to questions, and you may direct said question to either side of the debate. So let's start now. Is there any question on the floor right now? Anything regarding to arguments, anything regarding to rebuttals, anything whatsoever? Yes.
Hi, I have a question for the government side. Opposition side in this debate argued that if the government is the party having the power to issue these licenses, should they become corrupt or unable to properly regulate these licenses, we can vote them out. One of the check and balances that you're proposing on side government in this debate to act as a check and balance for these neutral parties. So if they abuse that power, what are the things that we can do to make sure that they don't, or we replace this neutral body? What is it that you're proposing? Thank you.
What we propose is just like how we regulate the election committee, right? At any point in time, if there has been abuse by the committee, automatically the government fires them because they are given a mandate by the government, and then we replace them with better substitutes. I think that is a better check and balance than it is to have governments. Or just like how we nominate the Attorney General. He acts as a neutral body. The moment he goes a step out of line and people are unhappy, he's removed from his position.
All right, thank you. Is there any other question on the floor? All right.
I have a question for government. What exactly the differentiations between independent companies and the government? Because if government have job to give license, it means that government should set different departments to different cities, different companies to give the license. They also have different people and hold different values. Maybe some is neutral, maybe some is conservative, some is liberal. But on the comparative, if those independent companies, they also have the likelihood to be controlled by some giant companies or those boss, and they also have those corruption and some things. So what exactly the differentiations you propose for the independent companies?
So basically the difference is the independent parties act as a safety measure or safety guard, because governments can change and governments are easier to be lobbied than these independent parties. I think in most circumstances, like politicians are actively lobbied as well, so indirectly they are the ones who are able to dictate what sort of news is being produced. Therefore, we think independent parties exist as a safety measure, because as governments are even voted out, then what happens? If the new government is more conservative or more right-wing, then it's most probably going to be the worst side of the scenario. They're more likely to start blocking you. And we think the uncertainty of the future, like unless we have some chairman who's able to actively debate what we should always err on the side of caution. And that's why we think independent parties are more trustworthy, in a sense in which they are less likely to change the ways they view certain news rather than governments.
Thank you very much for that. Next question. Yes.
My name is Lisa. I'm from UiTM Dunkil, and my question goes to side opposition. As you said before mentioned that accountability is really a need for a good government, right? So we have under acts such as official secrets and so forth that really restricts the freedom of speech. So how is under your paradigm can be sufficient to ensure the freedom of speech of the society is prevailed?
Opposition?
Hi, so what we argued essentially in this debate was that there are times upon which we agree that the government is allowed in restricting freedom of speech, and especially in the cases of the OSA, where it's regarding national security, we think it's justified that the government is controlling freedom of speech. So freedom of speech is a right, but it's never an absolute right, so it's fair for the government to restrict those rights.
All right, thank you very much, Azim. Next question. We'd like to hear from you. Okay?
Hi, I'm Irfan. My question goes for side of opposition. So, government also wanted to talk about how the abuse of the power of government happens. So, meaning that although your freedom of speech is not an absolute right, it is a right that can be taken away by government, but how do you then ensure that the abuse of rights of individuals on the ground, especially from all these corporations, is something that won't happen?
Opposition?
We can't entirely say that 100% that these people will have their rights to speech, because it's all up to the government in itself. So for example, when like VN was in power, then more rights were restricted, and now there's PH, so there's more right to speak up. But it's important for the government in itself to regulate these laws, because the government is the best person to understand how society works, especially like what makes them go wild and like violent versus like what makes them calm, right? So in that sense, societal protection and societal harmony is a bigger benefit than sometimes people's right to say probably like racist remarks or to like go against the government and say things that would provoke societal unrest.
Just to add on to that, I think we have to also, like, when it comes to holding governments accountable, right, I think there are also other measures besides printing and publication as well that is able to hold governments accountable. At this day and age, it's very easy for individuals on the ground to find out that your rights and freedoms are taken away from you, especially considering that we have other forms of media and we can access as social media. So these are also things that individuals can access in terms of holding governments accountable. But the reason why regulation in terms of printing and publication is important is that we don't want to give credibility to platforms that are able to misuse their power to give out information that is possibly false or give out information that possibly can incite hate.
Thank you very much for that, Iman and Rina. Do we have another question? Yes, we do.
So this question, I guess, more for the government side. So presumably your independent body will be modeled after the NCMC or like the EC, that kind of thing. So we know that the chief of these bodies are political appointees like Harun or Ifak Goya, which means they also serve at the pleasure of the current government. So with that in mind, how is that any different from having a government body at that?
Good question. What we felt in government was that I think as long as the government directly gives you your paycheck under the government body or under the government institution, it makes it very hard for you to be independent. So as much as you guys may feel like the chain of order is still the same, I think changing the legislative, and just one word, from being under the government and being neutral makes a very big difference to how much authority you can give the independent party to act against the government or to even criticize the government. And I think that's the difference here. Presumably, if you look at it in a sense where these individuals are still cronies, we can't do much about it, let's be honest, right? But what we can do is that if you decided to stand up for your independent body, you would have more power and autonomy under the side of government to do just that, as compared if you were under the government's purview of that.
Alright, thank you very much, Daniel. And that concludes the Q&A session. One last thing before we end, I just want to get a feel of the room and engage with the room some more. I've already taken votes before the debate happens, who is in favor of the government issuing that license and who is not in favor. So let's see whether the perception has changed. Who here thinks that the government should not be allowed to issue a printing and publication license? Please raise your hand. Who do not think that the government should be able to do so? Alright, and sorry. Who thinks that the government should not have the ability to issue a printing and publication license? Okay, terribly sorry for that. Okay, Who here thinks that the government should be issuing said license? Raise your hands. Oh, alright. So, good job, opposition. Alright, and that concludes the debate today. So before we present tokens of appreciation to the debaters, I'd like to invite the debaters to please take their seats on the floor. Okay, not on the literal floor, but in the floor of the audience. And we also like to present tokens of appreciation to the debaters for a wonderful show that they've given us. Everyone, let's give them another round of applause. And with that, I'd like to invite the CEO of the Malaysian Institute for Debate and Public Speaking to come to the front and present said token.
In case you don't understand the question, this is like when the media says two men got into a fight on the road. Instead of saying two men got into a fight, they will say a Malay man and a Chinese man got into a fight on the road. So this is referencing their gender, their race, their religion. So I can show that who here thinks the media should be banned from doing so? Are you? Okay, so I'm just going to double check. So the rest of you think it's okay for the media to reference gender, race, and religion? Those of you who think it's okay, hands up. And I'm going to thank you very much. Okay, so we'll invite the debaters right now. I hope you enjoy the debate.
Alright, thank you very much, Amelia. Let's kick off the debate. I would like to invite the 6 speakers of the debate to please take their seats at the front. For your information, on the government bench, we have Han Abhijit Singh from Taylor University, Sarah Shafiq from German Malaysian Institute, and Tariq Mekhtar, an alumnus of University of Technology Mara. And on the opposition, we have Dr. George Darulis from Warwick University, Umay Mashta from the International Islamic University of Malaysia, and Nika Filateo, alumnus of the Ateneo de Manila University. Give them another round of applause before we start the debate. Alright, and with that being said, we're going to start. For everyone, just to remind everyone, the topic of the debate is that the media should be banned from referencing gender, race, and religion in news reports and stories. For your information, this is a 3-on-3 debate. Each speaker will be given 6 minutes to speak, and they will be able to receive points of information from their opposing teams in the middle of their speech. Now, before we start, I'd like to first introduce our first speaker for today's debate, the Prime Minister. His name is Mr. Han Abhijit Singh. He is 20 years old. He is currently pursuing an undergraduate degree in law at the Taylor University. And when asked something interesting about you that you'd like the audience to know, he said he was Malaysia's national overall best speaker. But the more accurate title is overall best speaker. With multiple positions of ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite the Honourable Prime Minister to open the debate. Give it here.
Hello. Yes, okay, is everyone ready? Can I start? Yeah? Cool. A couple of months back, there was a skirmish at a temple in Petaling Jaya, and a fireman died as a result. What would have been a normal kill in action statistic spiraled into a potential flashpoint for racial conflict. The reason for this is because our reactions to race, religion, and gender are oftentimes bound by our personal biases and are oftentimes also bound by deep-seated distrust that we have
for different people of different races. I think that's the reality we need to engage with in this debate. So what do I want, assuming I was a government and assuming I could legislate? There would be no mention of any descriptors within the media. So what does this mean? Nobody would be able to suggest stuff like gender, race, religion, etc. I think a model that we would imply is quite similar to the German or the Sweden anti-hate legislation, where when an individual is noted to have committed a certain crime, there is no mention of the gender, there is no mention of the race, rather it's just a 24-year-old individual committed X certain action. Okay, everyone good with that? Cool. So I think the first question that I would like to answer here is, what is the right thing to do? So notice, if a government wants to ban certain things from being said, or certain things from being acquitted, we first have to talk about what the role of the government is. The role of the government is to prevent harm. This is to suggest you must prioritize the safety of your citizens over everything else. So if you notice, in the current stage, Pakatan Harapan wants to legislate and reform the pension fund that we currently have. The pension fund is very good for people that are benefiting of it. But for the next generation of people that are going to pay the debt for it, there is an inconsiderable harm placed on them. So that means just because there is a benefit to something existing, that doesn't mean government should allow for it to happen. Similarly, when it comes to reporting of race, there are benefits to it. We know how people of different races interact with each other, we know what's happening in our country, but we need to ask ourselves if that benefit is worth it when it comes at this potential cost. Number one, when the media reports with regards to race, there are always certain quarters in our country that benefit of racialized types of conflicts. There are race-based parties that want to use race as a method to regaining power in the federal government. I won't name them, you can draw that distinction for yourself. But secondly, when we do report on race, oftentimes there are already preconceived biases that we already have. When an Indian person is involved in an automotive accident, we think it's because potentially of alcoholism. There is no truth to the fact, but it is because we have these assumptions that people interact this way. So the point I'm making here is, knowing that this can happen, knowing that the mention of race is incredibly sensitive, knowing that people can potentially abuse it, it's negligent for the government at this particular juncture to allow for it to happen. But I think the second question we need to ask is, can we be better? And I'm not talking about the media, I'm talking about everyone here, myself and the audience. The reality is, we are incredibly irresponsible when it comes to discussions on race. How many of us have been on the Star and have seen just some of the randomest, most racist comments that have no relation to the media, no relation to the news story, but they're there anyways, like Johnson D4D, I don't know what it means, I don't know why people think it's funny, but it appears. Nobody really calls it out because there is a consistent cost associated with it. You have to deal with the trolls, you have to deal with the racists. Nobody wants to do that. Because we're all self-interested, we just allow for these negative comments to continually festering. So the reality is, Malaysians cannot self-regulate their own discussions on race. Until that juncture, we shouldn't talk about race because it's quite clear that we are just incapable of handling those discussions. Before I go ahead.
Wouldn't specific media interest groups that discuss about issues that are not that popular die out in your world?
Yeah, I think they will die out. I think it's a very good thing that they die out. Here's why. Firstly, let's talk about the media. Because the media is not just a monolith. There is no one big media company. There's multiple versions of them, and they all have specific interests. So for instance, in the current age where Facebook, Twitter, and Google all exist, there are actually algorithms that pander to specifically what people want to talk about. So for the liberal person that's really woke about race, that understands structural oppression and historical injustice, the type of news you get tends to be one that is positive about race. But let's just acknowledge the majority of the population here in Malaysia. Not everyone is privileged enough to access this highly academic liberal literature. Rather, the way we see race is based on the discussions that we have with people around you. So for the boy that is born in a kampung that has no one else to talk to beyond people that are afraid of their race losing power, that's how they conceptualize race. That's the reason as to why on Twitter, immediately after Adib's death, the immediate accusation was not that the fire department was negligent, rather it was that there was a concentrated effort on behalf of Malaysian Indians to kill a fellow Malay brother. The reality is, even when we try to rectify these falsehoods, by the time a story is published, it's too late to rectify it because it has spread. It's been retweeted millions of times, thousands of people have seen it, and the damage is there to be seen. That's why even if you look at Harian Metro, when they were at their peak, running storylines like Upper Lagi China Mao, they were still able to sustain themselves because there is a whole group of people that like that kind of headlines, but also like that their racist views were being affirmed. So the point I'm trying to make here is this. The type of people that are hurt when it comes to race being reported are oftentimes minorities like yourself. I don't know if you're a minority, I definitely am. That we don't have much to defend ourselves with. So it's not so much about if there are benefits, if we can identify certain race quarters. All of that can happen. But I think you need to ask yourself if these statistics, knowing truths that we already know, are worth it if it comes at the potential cost of individuals being hurt. In 628, I speak it on. So before I leave, race is something that's going to stay consistent throughout our lives. Whether or not the media discusses it well, I don't know. But I think the onus is on us to be slightly better about it. So for that reason, we shouldn't talk about race. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naveen, for that speech. I would like to say a few things about our next speaker. His name is Joshua George Harvey. He is 19 years old, and he's currently pursuing philosophy, politics, and economics at the University of Warwick, all the way in the United Kingdom. And when we asked him something interesting about you that you'd like the audience to know, he said, I heard that the yield curve is inverting. So if anyone is willing to give me a job or an internship, that would be really good for my parents. With that being said, I would like to invite the Leader of Opposition. Here.
shorter than the previous video.
I think the government side would like all of you to believe that under their policy, everybody would be seen as a blank canvas. The reality is far more different. The reality is that you have internal biases that are likely to point you in a certain direction that you shouldn't be pointed to just because that is what is constructed in society as well. We haven't removed the base problem here. That is to say that unless we target the specific realities that are constructed in society, we are unlikely to improve the lives of the exact same individuals we wanted to protect on their side of the house. Two arguments in my speech. The first is how we hold the media accountable and why that is really important. And the second is how we, in a system on our side, help break down the prejudices that already exist in society. But before that, one main point against the speaker before me, because what he talked about was the role of the government to protect the most vulnerable. What is the alternative? And this is something you all need to understand, is that the alternative is they only have the Twitter trolls propagating these sort of narratives about race, religion and gender. On our side, we have the media. Even if you want to say they are less accountable, there's some accountability to hold the narratives to a court. On their side, you lose that and you let the airwaves be filled by the very same people that say you spout the racist or sexist vitriol that we see in chat rooms today. If nobody wants to reduce that, you don't give them more airwaves to do that exact same thing. But more importantly, how do we improve media accountability? And this is the important bit of framing that you need to understand from this speech. That is, the most popular news sources today in this country have much more ambiguous stances on issues. It's not like the radical differences between like Fox News and like BBC Spectrum. I think it's far harder to see where the Malaysian news sources stand on a specific issue. What is more likely is they take strategic stances. So sometimes there will be like racist articles that come from their side. But I think it's more likely when death happens, you're likely to say there's some race involved, but you're not unsure what their stance is. How does it radically change from their side of the house? Two things. The first is that when you have a blank canvas, it's much more easier for you to fill in, for example, details that you will likely sway people subconsciously for you to have predisposed biases against those people. Why? Because now you're unlikely to show images of people. You're unlikely, for example, to have these sources that means that you can effectively mitigate against people trying to be racist. Why is it better on our side of the house? Because on our side of the house, we have the ability for you to actually vet what is going on, because the discussion of race is plain and bare. If someone is being racist, you know specifically whether they're being racist. There they hide behind some veiled curtain of attempt to try to hide behind their racism. What is the impact of this? Subconsciously, society is more likely to be involved and more likely to be exposed to media sources that mean that specifically they have an incentive to sway people more to the right and left. What we see in other developed countries, we lose that ability for us to be critical thinkers and be the same positive news sources we have today. Before moving on, sure.
So you're correct. There are trolls in the world of government that still exist. The difference is in your world, they have actual news stories to back up their beliefs and to justify it to people. Why is that better?
So, understanding how these news stories are constructed isn't as radical as you like to talk about. The vast amount of news stories that involve race probably involve some sort of encounter or some sort of altercation between two groups of people. On our side of the house, when you actively publicize or publish about that story and race is involved, it's easy for you to say, oh, this specific news source is racist, whereas on their side it's harder to see. We tell you the impact of this isn't in the short term, but it's in the long term when you are subconsciously infused by the same hidden messages that they would like to propagate on their side of the house. But more importantly, even if you don't believe anything I just said for the last 4 minutes, what is the second important piece of argumentation that I come up is about how we combat and correct prejudices. Because the reality of the situation is that we are still in a society that not only has biases, but only has structural barriers that face certain groups of people. Why do we need to talk about this in the media? If a certain group of people face a systemic oppression, like they're more likely to suffer poverty, they're more likely to be the victim of drug abuse cases. This is a case that can't just be talked about in Parliament, but needs to be part of the wider social discussion. Why? Because for you to get the change to translate into parliamentary laws or the discussions for Parliament, people need to be galvanized by this situation. Why does this not happen? Because when it talks about poverty rates, it's 30% of Malaysians are poor. But this is acknowledge the fact that, for example, 60% of that 30% are Indians, and that is a harm that only affects a certain minority of group of people. Now we want to play the minority card. I'll play it too. If it's the group of people that you want to defend, it shouldn't be masked behind the fact that there are other groups of people that have a better quality of life, but you don't see the differences. We see the differences when the Star reported that quotas exist in education that systemically harm people of a different race that are not Malay, for example. This is how we combat this. We have that general discussion and the public gets involved. What are the discussions that are unlikely going to be reported on? Things that also affect women about sexual harassment, about cases about rape, because these are specific things that involve the power dynamics between gender as well. What is the impact of this? To dilute any progressive change or forward traction for the people that you're supposed to be fighting for. Why is this harmful? We tell you three things. The first is that the lack of discussion means that society's general perception of the issue is an issue that is solved and something that we shouldn't fight further. Second, we tell you that for specific groups of people, they are more likely than not going to be continuously berated by the media. Under my first argument, where the media is less likely to have empathy for them because race is no longer consideration in the calculus of these media houses. And the third thing which we say is that the media has no incentive to, for example, care about these individual stakeholders in things like producing these sort of reports like on quotas in education and healthcare. These are long-term impacts, not just the murder cases that the previous speaker before me wanted to talk about. It impacts every day of our lives when we want to have general discussions about things that really are intertwined in the fabric of our country. It's said in America and it's said in Malaysia as well. Race and religion and gender are issues that are being infused from the day our country was formed. For you to just sideline that and ignore that isn't the reality means that people that are subjugated by that reality never get a course of action to speak out and improve the quality of their lives. For every bad media reporter, you have one that's trying to fight for a cause that they believe in. Let's give them that voice and let's not silence the people that are going to help our country grow at large.
Thank you very much, Joshua, for that speech. Now, responding to the leader of opposition, we have Ms. Sarah Muhammad Shafiq. She's 19 years old, currently pursuing her A levels at the German Malaysian Institute. And when we asked something interesting about her that she'd like to share, she said, growing up, I wanted to be a rock star, but that's pretty impossible. Then I discovered math and physics, which actually happens to be just as fun. I have now come to terms that I'll be happy even if I'm not a rock star. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
It is really unfortunate that we just cannot choose a lot of things in life. I cannot choose my race, I cannot choose the gender in which I am born, I cannot choose what religion I am. These are intrinsic parts of identity which I just cannot choose. But to the extent at which you quantify that these are identities that suddenly lead to individuals committing a certain crime or doing something, like I don't think that link necessarily exists. And that is what doesn't exist on side of opposition. We think the world is already divisive enough, but it is time that we stop looking past our differences and looking at all our problems as a cohesive whole. Malaysian Baru was supposed to be one where we believe in the race of Malaysia and not of the race of the Malays, Chinese or Indians. It is time that we go beyond that and we treat individuals as they are and not as a representative of what their race is. In my speech, I'm going to talk to you about two things. The first as to how news affects people, and second, why it's extremely pernicious for you to punish individuals or punish communities upon the acts of individuals in which they never had any consent to or they never had any ability to choose from. But before that, a couple of responses. The first thing that opposition wanted to tell you was that, guys, discussions are better. We think discussions are not that great on their side of the house. Have you seen? I just started. The first thing to say is, these discussions are oftentimes skewed because at the point in which most of your news outlets are paid by a lot of rich people, they're less likely going to want to know of what the things that they did are wrong. That's why a lot of times the news that you see will tend towards the majority and not necessarily talk about what the minorities' problems are. Therefore, what's the comparative that we provide? We think a world in which you do not talk about the majority, but you talk about specific problems without even telling individuals that this is a minority's problem, but this is our problem, masks the fact that there exist divisive natures within our world, but exist to form a more cohesive and a more wholesome news and more wholesome report. Have you seen? But secondly, we think that these biases that we naturally have within Cinesco are a product of years and years of news outlets telling us that the Chinese act a certain way, the Malays act a certain way. Therefore, how do we solve this? Maybe you and I will not be away from these biases, but the kids that grow up after this policy will not have these biases anymore. Therefore, we think in the long run, at the very least, we have that ensured future. The comparative on that side of the house, have you seen? You depend on people talking. You don't know if this talking necessarily will bring about any form of change. But lastly, this lack of discussion within Cinesco, I think it's just inherently bad for us to think that poverty or sexual abuse is necessarily an identity thing, that only women should champion it, only the minorities should talk about it. This is something that you need everyone to talk about it. Have you seen? But at the point in which you put certain labels or
objective good. And the objective good is always to prioritize a more cohesive and a less divisive world. Have you seen? But furthermore, he told you how race is often politicized, how individuals within political parties naturally take race in how it is beneficial towards them getting voters rather than how it's beneficial towards helping those individuals on the ground. But even more than that, he told you how stereotypes are made even stronger, and that the inability for individuals to self-regulate means that some news outlets are even able to keep on profiting out of the direct discrimination and direct wrong interpretation of certain groups, that there always is a market for that. Before I move on to a more positive method, I'll take Joshua.
So media on both sides have biases. When is it easier to call out in racist media? When they actively are racist, or when they hide behind their racism on their side of the house?
So literally, there's no hiding behind anything because we aren't even talking about race. We don't think there is a natural correlation between a certain race and the act of crime that they make. So explain it more now. What is the principle that we believe in? Firstly, there is literally no correlation between your identity and the things that you do. You cannot tell me that this Muslim individual committed an act of treason because he was Muslim. There is literally no correlation and no link towards that. The way in which you specify this identity means that other individuals who are Muslim, they were never able to make a consensus on what the Muslim identity was. But what happens now is, individuals will now stereotype Muslims as being terrorists, will now stereotype like Indians or Chinese as being less good or less of a good race as other races. The very idea that individuals within that community had no ability to consent and no ability to come to a consensus on what their community necessarily brings about means that when you make one individual the staple and representative of what that community is, you directly go against the other individuals on the ground and harm them even more. Because the stereotypes that individual made isn't only applied to them, but applied towards the whole community who never had a choice and who never had the ability to correct these wrongs. Therefore, the state must do something to go against that. The fact that individuals are naturally harmed because of things that they never do, we think this is a world that we don't like. Second argument, how news naturally affects people. Let's say, in the best case scenario, there is good news that a certain individual from community X does something good. Maybe our opposition will tell us that, yeah, it brings about visuality. But let me tell you why it's actually bad for them when you talk about race. The first thing is, the way in which we will now view community X is that we will increase pressure upon them. We will tell them that maybe you are able to be great, then we should only put you up to the level which is equal towards other individuals. This is bad because oftentimes success stories of, let's say, individuals who are initially poor and now they become rich are very rare and come few in and between. What this means is, when you put all poor people within that standard, you literally make it that much harder for those individuals within that background. But secondly, why even good news would harm these individuals is because it increases complacency. When you already have a valid reason that when you are from a certain community and you can still succeed, what this means is more likely the government or more likely other bodies are going to decrease affirmative action or decrease quotas towards these communities because they already told you, like, you already have someone that succeeded. So these are literal acts of news outlets which will literally harm these individuals, and we cannot have that. In a world where it is fair, we need to view individuals as they are and not simply a part of the community that they were. So how does this naturally change the way people think? We think normalization happens within status quo, even the bad stereotypes. Like literally, everyone knows the Florida man meme when they do something whack or when they do some weird ass crime. So what this means is, sorry for my language, so what this means is literally, people just like to normalize even the weirdest things or just like to normalize anything that they are able to normalize. So in conclusion, guys, it's time for us to stop, it's time for us to look past the things that we cannot change and actually look towards the things that we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that speech. Now, the next person speaking, her name is Umay Mashtad binti Muhammad Azhar. She is 20 years old, currently pursuing an undergrad in law at the International Islamic University, Malaysia. And when asked something interesting about you that you'd like the audience to know, she said, "I'm very interested in public policy nowadays." With that being said, I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition. You're here.
Testing? Ladies and gentlemen, the fundamental freedom of media has allowed for unpopular issues that targets minorities and women to come to light. Social progression has moved in a linear direction with the presence of media, and the absence of it, I don't think that these issues would necessarily be spoken about. I have a few issues in my speech. The first is, will stereotypes actually exist in the absence of media? Will we really get to rectify and collectivize to fix these issues that we talk about, such as Islamophobia and also not engaging in minorities? Number two, how does this necessarily affect political discourse? And lastly, how do you keep media outlets accountable in status quo? So I have a few things to respond to. Firstly, I think that a lot of the arguments coming from the side of government is contingent upon the fact that if you remove the element of media, you will inevitably get rid of all of these stereotypes that exist in status quo. I think that racism and Islamophobia is something that is systemic. It comes from things such as culture, religion, and communities that have been systematically not interacted with minorities for the longest period of time. And I think that at that point in time where you remove media, where facts can actually be able to be checked at that point in time, you allow for more inflammatory issues to happen, but the difference is that it won't come to light. Also, another thing that was mentioned by the previous speaker was that you would inevitably be able to have these media outlets be able to become to be able to target specific minorities, and it's harmful. Firstly, that's contingent upon the fact that media institutions are a monopoly, which they are not. There are a lot of global networks such as CNN, Free Malaysia, Awani, that have multifarious ways of wanting to move forward with the kind of reporting that they have. And they have an incentive to check upon one another due to the fact that they compete with one another in the kind of journalism that necessarily is the best for the public, because I think that there are a lot of ways you can regulate media. For example, the laws and regulation by states on media, or the community guidelines that exist on social media. I think that also, if you notice, there is a current move towards social awareness and the kind of news that is reported to ensure that a lot of these institutions report responsibly, right? Because of the fact that individuals are just turned off with things that are clickbaity and sensationalized within status quo. I think that this comes in checks and balance, no thank you, on things like liberal media, NGOs, and also specific interest groups who want to fight for these particular movements, right? Another thing that came from the previous speaker is that there are a lot of things such as complacency within a lot of minorities at the point in time where there are existing media institutions. Firstly, I think that in our world, we would be able to target specific demographics that require help, such as reporting on the poor, reporting on sexual harassment on women, reporting on the domestic abuse. Notice that in Malaysia, we have 4,293 women who are sexually harassed and domestically abused from January until December, and all of those things would be able to be coming to light at that point in time where there is a discussion revolving it. So I think that complacency happens in your world. So how does this inevitably help political discourse? Entering my second issue. I think that at that point in time where you have media that targets or discusses about race, religion, etc., you have facts to disprove the wrong issues that are currently discussed within status quo. I think if you realize, a lot of the issues of minorities are usually not discussed because these are distant issues from society. A lot of people cannot relate to this. For example, when we're talking about indigenous communities who are rallying against the corporations who are taking their land, it is more likely to be perceived as, from an average reasonable person, this is just taking away your property, it's for development. But for these very individuals, they deserve a loud voice on media, and they wouldn't necessarily be able to get that. I'll take you at 5. I think that it's necessarily important because a lot of issues, for example, Muslim extremism that happens in Malaysia with a lot of Muslim boys joining ISIS, or the sodomy that would exist towards like these sensitive issues that happen in Malaysia, I think that all of these things would be able to come to light at that point in time where you have media reporting on these specific issues. Thirdly, how do you then keep media outlets accountable? Other than competition, I think that a lot of the instances we would be able to target which media institutions are racist and which media institutions are not. So for example, if you're looking at America, when we're looking at Fox News, it is obviously that a lot of the statements coming from Fox News are inflammatory and are against the public morality that a lot of individuals necessarily talk about.
case of is that we will have facts that prove that racism is a thing. Given that media organizations are profit incentivized and they have to pander to majorities, why don't they just report the inverse of these facts to show what people want to see rather than the objective truth?
Because of the global networks that exist, one main form of news that says that this is the correct form of interpretation isn't going to dominate the discussion necessarily. So if you have multiple media outlets, wanting to have an incentive to check one another, you will be able to find out what is the truth and individuals get to decide, right? But moving on to something more important, which is the fact that I think in status quo, when you have and are able to identify media institutions that funnel in racist comments, etc., you would be able to know who actually funds these, which political parties fund these particular media institutions, or who are they hiring in order to have these inflammatory statements within status quo, what are the kind of specific demographics of individuals that they target, and I think that the average reasonable person would either distance away from that particular discussion and realize that this isn't the best media for them, or individuals who already buy into Fox News, etc., are more likely to just stay there. I think that what's important in this debate are the people who are average and reasonable and decide that inflammatory racist statements aren't the way to go about for the progression of society. And if you continuously feel like the harm is going to exacerbate, you will lose out on that audience that becomes a political rallying point in the empowerment of those minorities that need us in status quo. For all those reasons, go inside opposition.
Thank you very much, Umay, for their speech. And continuing off, we have the government whip, and that person is Mr. Tariq Maktab. He is 33 years old, an alumnus of University Technology Mara in law, and when asked something interesting about him that he'd like the audience to know, he said, "I'm currently learning Korean because one never stops learning." With that being said, I would like to invite the government whip. Here.
Sir, how old again? 33!
13.
Ladies and gentlemen, the side of opposition here are the kind of, have a very elitist way of looking at things. We're very simple people here from side government. We speak to the common people. We're not going to talk about active discourse around the liberalization of race. I'll talk very simply, right? I'll cover three main groups that this debate deals with. One, the media. Two, government and policy discussions. Three, society. But before I move on to discussion of those three groups, let's just talk about something that's very clear about how debating works. Do we have to, in order for us to win this debate, do we have to show that our policy would eliminate Islamophobia and prejudices? No, we don't. No policy is perfect. But we think that we should enact this policy if we can reduce those biases or at least not exacerbate existing prejudices. The problem with opposition is that they acknowledge that these prejudices exist, but at no point did they tell us how the media would be able to handle it or show that at the worst case they would be able to limit the kind of harms that the kind of media pandering to the prejudices would necessarily cause. So that being said, let's move on to the first one, and I think that leads to the first issue I want to talk about, which is the media. We think that when it comes to news reporting, as much as you want to be objective, there is always a bias in what you report in terms of what facts you include or what facts you exclude. right? And when you talk about things like race, religion, and gender, opposition wants you to believe that after you read an article where these identifiers are put forward, people can have a rational discussion of those issues. As my first speaker, Naveen, pointed out, when you talk about the issues like the Temple riot, people did not have a rational discussion of what happened. And there's a reason for that, because race, religion, and gender are very intrinsic to our identity. And when people have discussions or critique it, criticize it, people feel attacked. And therefore they're less likely to want to listen rationally or to have some kind of moderate discussion with you on those very issues. Right? So I think that, I'll talk about that later in terms of policy discussions, but I think the first thing we have to identify is opposition cannot get away with this idea that media reporting, including those identifiers, will lead to a good discussion. The second problem that the media has is the real question that we asked here. Can the media self-regulate? And that's why the question coming from Prime Minister was very important here. When you talk about trends today, when there's a decreasing number of people who read or click on media, the media today have a very great tendency towards pandering to the average person. We agree that people have these prejudices and biases, and the media knows that too. So the best way for them to get the clicks that you want is to have headlines that tackle those very issues that would exacerbate those same things. Because that's what gets people angry, that's what gets people to comment on those pages, that's what gets the clicks that they very much want. And we think that the kind of pandering that they will have is very detrimental to the kind of society that we want at the end of the day. What did the speaker before me tell you? She said, well, this affects specific issue reporting. We don't think so. Like, an example I'll put forward is that when you talk about reporting of sexual assault, what you see is that there's a huge reporting of sexual assault on females, but a huge underreporting of sexual assaults on males. Now that leads to the problem that males feel ashamed of coming forward. Now we think that generally speaking, you can avoid that entirely by reporting the problem of sexual assault as a whole, and therefore make it, at least push for policies against sexual assault or sexual harassment, rather than making it a gender issue, making it more of a social or societal broad issue as a whole. So in terms of the first issue of whether the media will be better off, in terms of this, we say they will be better off because following the Swedish and German model, the kinds of reporting you would have would still put forward the same kind of information that you have, just with less identifiers that will lead to the biases they talk about. Second group that we want to talk about. There were two things there was one thing that my Prime Minister talked about firstly, the role of the government to protect society by minimizing or preventing harm. He brought through the German and Swedish model of not having identifiers in terms of reporting, but I would extend that as well. When you talk about government preventing the media from reporting on things that could be harmful, that's why we have media blackouts on reporting on things like state secrets, because we acknowledge that there is such a thing as too much information, or information that can be damaging to the public to be able to digest as a whole. So if you agree that the government can limit the media's ability to report something when it's damaging to society, then you must follow through with this policy. The second issue that we have is, if there is indeed a policy that is related to those groups that you talk about, gender, religion, or race, we think that those discussions are best done behind closed doors among experts who are able to soberly discuss these issues. The problem there is when you have these media reporting on these issues, you have social media wars, you have arguments all the time, and there's no way for you to have a good public conversation on that very issue. In fact, what you're more likely to have is public pressure of a very fickle kind, of a very emotional kind of government to pass certain laws or enact policies that target a particular group and may be rushed as a whole. Yes?
The question all of you need to ask is, on a conversation of race, religion, gender, do you want your only source to be from your social media warriors or from newspapers that have a higher standard?
I don't know about you, but I don't always trust our media organizations, and I think the way that we live today is when we start trusting the media when they seem to have a very inordinate, very high trust in media. We don't think that's necessarily true. In fact, we think what's more likely is, if you don't report on these details, people are more likely to want to find out those details on their own, which I think is better for the kind of skepticism that you have towards these media organizations, rather than accepting whatever they report to be the absolute truth. So secondly, we've shown you why the government can better pass policies when they have discussions behind closed doors. The same kind of discussions that you want to have. right? Lastly is this idea of society in terms of prejudices and biases. We not only talked about the worst labels, right? This is something that my second speaker talked about, that the speaker before me didn't want to talk about, right? She also showed you the problem of having positive labels, the kind of stereotypes that pressure people to conform to those kind of ideals, and then make it so it's hard for them to break out. We think there is such a thing that even positive stereotypes can be harmful. What we would rather have is to have issues and individuals judged on their merits and not on the identifiers that you place upon them. That only happens, that kind of discussion only happens within society when you don't allow the media to perpetuate or at least exacerbate, to make this discussion even worse. As the speaker before me also said, there is no correlation between identifiers and behaviors. When you talk about like Muslim identities or even this idea of what a Muslim identity really is. When the first speaker of opposition talked about the poverty rate and how like 30% of the people who are living below the poverty line are Indian, we think that's a problem with society as a whole in terms of dealing with poverty, and we shouldn't make poverty a racialized issue. The problem in Malaysia is that we often try to segment issues into the identifiers that you're part of, whether you're a male, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Malay. And we think we have to start acknowledging that the problems we face today are a society-wide issue. And for those reasons, we're really proud to propose.
Thank you very much, Tariq, for that speech. And to end today's debate, just a few things about the opposition whip. Her name is Mika Felodeo. She's 21 years old. She just graduated with a bachelor's degree in management and major in legal management from the Ateneo de Manila University. And when asked something interesting about herself that she'd like to share, she said she's a lover of cute animal stickers, caramel macchiatos, and Jollibee. With that being said, to end the debate, I invite the opposition whip. Here.
Back in the 90s and early 2000s, news narratives were controlled by three major companies: RTM, TV3, and TV7. Lo and behold, these companies were either government-owned or government-leaning. There were huge issues of bias against particular races, huge issues of not reporting on government issues. But today, we see many different news companies. We see Malaysia TV, Astro Awani, The Star, and many other international sources of news media. What all of this shows is, it's true, the world today isn't perfect. We have a lot to learn, we have a lot to improve, but we are constantly moving forward. The first question we have to ask is, are we truly doomed? Are we too racist, too stubborn, too bigoted to have any conversation about race, religion, or gender at all? And what I'll tell you right now is that global trends point to the exact opposite. There are 4 reasons why we are ready to have these conversations. First, the fact that globalization is happening means that we are constantly tearing down borders, and we are engaging and understanding with people who used to be millions and miles away from us. The second thing is, related to globalization, there are huge rates of intermarriage, which means most households today are actually of mixed origin and are of mixed religions, mixed races, mixed ethnicities, and we are constantly understanding people who used to be very far from us. Third, the digital revolution that has allowed us increased accessibility of education and allowed us to learn about things where we previously didn't have access to them because they were just too expensive for us to reach. And fourth, the burgeoning middle class that has allowed even the poor to get access to education. The government today has more money for welfare and education than it did 20, 30, 50 years ago, ladies and gentlemen. Which just goes to show the world is improving, we are learning more, and we can talk about these things. We think the problem on their side of the house is they have a very negative view of the world. But if you look at global trends and even trends in Malaysia, there are many things that have improved. Globally, you see gay marriage being legalized in all 50 states of the US. You see it being legalized in Taiwan. In Malaysia, you see many more progressive politicians questioning the Bumi Putra laws, which just goes to show that things are improving, ladies and gentlemen, and we are ready to have these conversations. Now, what is the difference between our side and their side? We think the push for greater accessibility of information happen because the media is able to talk about these things and inform people that, there is a problem with our current welfare laws and it's only benefiting a particular race. Or there is a problem with sexual harassment and it's deeply, deeply harming our gender minorities. We think if you don't allow these conversations to be accessible, if you don't allow them to be on media, then we are never able to continue this constant push towards liberalization. My first speaker explained the exclusive benefits of media. He said that media is one, accessible in the way that you can access it even without paying money. But second, it's accessible in a way that you don't have to have a PhD or a master's to be able to understand what it says. You can watch a video and you don't even have to speak English to know that it's a problem. But on their side, there is no way to be able to combat any of these biases. Second question, are all media houses truly evil? The first thing I want to point out is exactly what the forum earlier said, which is many journalists go into journalism knowing that you're not going to get a lot of money out of it. A lot of people go into it as vocation. And it's really strange to us that in a debate or in a forum about media, they seem to accuse the media of being all bad guys, ladies and gentlemen, which is totally wrong. We think the media is full of honest, good faith people that try very hard to release a lot of information to the public when previously a lot of these information weren't accessible. First, we want to say that there's a lot of prohibitions that regulate instances where people are irresponsible. You have very strong libel and slander laws that actually destroy reputations that a lot of journalists are terrified of. Therefore, they're not going to release fake information. Second, you also have very strong fake news laws that are now being extended to the online sphere, which means even if you post a status or a tweet online, you can be very well held accessible for anything you post and stuff like that. The second thing I want to point out is, they say, well, social media is a better source. No, we don't think so. As pointed out in the POI by my teammate, it's significantly worse because social media doesn't have the same regulations that journalists do have. Journalists, literally, this is their livelihood. Everything is on the line if they post anything fake. But for somebody as just like a passive observer online, they don't have the same fears. So we think it's significantly better for people to get information on race, gender, religion from trusted and regulated sources versus unregulated sources online. But the last and most important question, how then do we help minorities? And I'm going to talk about this in two ways. First, negative news, and second, positive news. Sure.
If it is true that everyone is as liberal as you say, why do we still need all these labels? Why can't we just help everyone as liberal as we are?
Because you need the stories to come out. People need to know that sexual harassment is worse for gender minorities, that poverty is a race issue, that there is a huge terrorism issue that is linked to religion. And if people don't know that it's related to all of these things, then we're never going to be able to create proper solutions to fix these problems, which is exactly the third question. First, the reason why we need to know about the labels is because it allows us to learn targeted solutions. For example, if there's an issue of land grabbing about indigenous communities and the government proposes just moving them away, that's a terrible solution because people wouldn't have known that the important issue there was actually about ancestral domain. People wouldn't have known to protect the land instead of to relocate them. There are specific nuances to very, very key and important issues that we will never be able to solve if we don't look at the racial, religious, ethnic links with these issues. But the second, about challenging stereotypes, which is related to positive perceptions. Imagine a patriarchal world where nobody celebrates the achievements of women. Nobody knows that transgender individuals are actually harmed. Nobody knows that there are individuals like, let's say, African Americans who graduate college and who get PhDs later on. The only way for us to positively challenge stereotypes is if we release stories of achievements about people who previously were invisible. We think in their world, all of the members of minorities will continue to stay in the shadows. It is only our side that allows them to be pushed forward. Thanks.
Alright, thank you very much to all those speakers for a fantastic debate. Everyone, let's give them another round of applause. Alright, considering that this weekend is all about conversations, I would like to invite the 6 speakers to just stay put at their seats. And I would like to ask the audience for questions, things that they would like to inquire about, arguments, rebuttals, or whatever that was discussed just now with all the debaters at the front. So let's start. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to ask a question? Yes, first question.
My question is directed to side government in this debate, particularly to, you know what, anyone can answer. So, for specific issues that side opposition has brought up in the debate, like sexual harassment, do you think the issue can be addressed as effectively if the gender element or the gender analysis is not brought forward like what was suggested in government whip? Thank you.
Government?
So I think, so as I spoke about earlier, I think that you can have these discussions, but I think if you talk about the policy level for governments, I think like governments have access to that data without needing the media to report on them. So in terms of what your question means is, I think we can have solutions to deal with it without the media having to report on those identifiers. So we can deal with sexual harassment as a whole. The government would have probably a better idea of what would probably be able to have discussions with experts on how to better deal with it without having to have the public involved.
Right, thank you very much, Tariq. So, next question. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask? Yes, sir.
I have a question for the government side. If this is the beginning of a gender race, where does it end? Because tomorrow it would be the government would say we don't cover crime, we don't cover XYZ. So then you're limiting the role of press by just adding more and more factors to it. So eventually there will be no news because everything would get covered as having an impact on society.
Thank you. Government?
So I think it literally just stops at age, or it just stops at the things in which you are able to identify yourself. So things that you cannot change. Probably we won't show individuals' pictures, we won't tell them what their age is, we won't tell them what race they are, what religion they are. Because like these are innate things which are personal to you, and oftentimes it doesn't even affect what you're doing. So even if we say like there are extremist Muslims, we don't necessarily think that when you report about it being a Muslim thing, it does justice to other Muslims. So we need to go beyond on how this individual acts and think about the whole community as well. But we think that often it just stops to things that you cannot change. The race that you have, the religion that you are in, your age, your appearance, those are the things in which we should not report. But then the fact that an individual committed a crime against another individual and how that crime was committed, the procedures in which you bring that individual to court, those are things in which we would report as normal news.
Right, thank you very much, government team. Next question, I believe you have a question.
Do you think government has a role in regulating what people can say or media can say? Since I think exchange of idea like this debate is already enough to self-regulate what is right and wrong. So, do you think it's necessary to have government as arbiter? Yeah. Do you think for both sides?
Either side. Maybe someone from opposition?
From the opposition side, we think that the government shouldn't necessarily intervene with things like free media, because I feel like when it comes to governments that are obviously linked with political parties, etc., sometimes they have their own interests in what they want to pursue. If they're given an ability to regulate, for example, with things like the Anti-Fake News Act, if it comes to a political issue, there might be an ability for governments to, for example, not discuss those political issues or deem them as sensitive and then clamp down on media institutions that want to report on those kind of things. So if they're given, if the media institutions are given freedom, I think at that point in time we'll be able to have better dissemination of news. People should be able to decide for themselves what they want to believe in contrast to a government that feeds you information on what you should believe in.
Thank you. Government?
So, I think that, as Naveen said, right, sometimes when you report something and there is it can set off a chain of events that are quite uncontrollable. And I mean, I personally believe myself in free media, but I think there is a saying in Malay that is quite applicable, and I mean, paraphrase it in English, it's like, canoes can be rowed backwards, but not words.
Hello? Alright, thank you very much, government team. We have a question here just now, right? Yeah, let's start with you first.
Hello, so this is for all. Talking about media, and if you think about it, it's technically on a scale where different corporations are either biased in terms of conservatism or are they on the left and right. So companies like Fox News or Breitbart or conservative media outlets who most oftentimes speak out against racism, they speak against a lot of these things. So what are your check and balances? Because if you think about it, although regulation happens, however, still there are going to be outlets who are still going to clamp down on these minorities.
Hi. Okay, so I think when it comes to large and conservative media houses, the problem with them isn't just the news they give out, right? The problem is also who they fund, who they're associated with, and all of these issues that are, behind public doors. And in order to stop or to know that these things are happening, you need to know what their biases are. So if they're producing conservative or, racist media, then you know that they are racist platforms. Therefore, it's easier to create solutions to stop the more subconscious problems that are actually more dangerous than the news they release. But if you're just stopping them from releasing news, then you lose the markers to know that they are truly dangerous in the more subconscious ways. So I think targeting one is the greater priority than stopping the news that they give out.
Thank you very much, opposition. Next question.
To opposition yet again. So the opposition stated earlier, right, there is correlation between gender, religion and race. But aren't all the contentions given from opposition is just showing positive discrimination? How about negative discrimination?
Opposition.
Sorry, could you clarify the question?
So in discrimination, we have two forms, positive discrimination and negative discrimination. But all the conditions that you stated earlier in your side, it's actually promoting positive discrimination. So there are also negative effects. So how would you like to say and respond towards that?
Yeah, so I think the stance that we took is that we're not denying that there are certain news organizations that will negatively discriminate against people. But there are two responses that we gave out. The first is that once you know that someone is negatively discriminating and very racist, it's very easy to call out in our world in comparison to their world where it's a bit harder and a bit more shady to do so. Because I think both you can't say the incentives of individuals suddenly change. Individuals are still wanting to see those kind of news stories that excite you or aggravate you. But on their side of the house, you have to do it in a way that's kind of sneaky. You have to kind of hide it to get around this law. On our side, we're very plain and obvious that this is the reality. And if, for example, Fox News will say, that Fox News is racist, that's not me. You subscribe to that. Does that make sense?
Alright, thank you very much, opposition. I think we have time for one last question by this gentleman here.
Alright, thank you very much. So I've got one question which is in two versions for either side. So for the government, how do you ensure that if you're going to report and you're going to push for media to report everything, a gender, a religion, a racial, a ethnic, whatever, to ensure that they do that without a biased, patriarchal, cis, hetero, majority race lens? Because as we know in the forum just now, that the current media ecosystem is very male-oriented, that lacks diversity. So how are you going to ensure that happens in terms of the policies that if you could make changes to? And for the opposition, how do you ensure that stories are told and are not sensationalized with currently how media is only pandering to, it is pandering to stories to get advertising opportunities, and it's working with an algorithm that only allows you to read what you perhaps scroll on Pornhub. So that's my question to both sides.
I think we can start with the first question of the government team. Okay, maybe opposition can go first with your question.
Right, so I think that there are 3 ways to prevent them. So first would be government regulation to prevent the worst forms of news twisting. So if it's obviously fake and outlandish claim, then there's government regulation to prevent those things. Second, I think media houses are constantly calling each other out. I think what was mentioned in the forum earlier was also that the journalist community is very small in the way that a lot of them know each other, they know what somebody's doing, they know what story this person's reporting on. And many of them are people who believe in good faith, in like journalism with integrity, which means there's a strong push to maintain the integrity of the profession. So they constantly call each other out to prevent any tainting of journalism. And the last I think a lot of the reasons why media houses tend to resort to, let's say, sensationalizing media, creating clickbaits, is because profit becomes a problem. But I think that, especially for the digital media houses, they've been innovating ways to try to generate profit, and innovating ways also to reduce costs in certain areas so they don't have to spend so much and resort to clickbaity, all those shenanigans. So one way is to try more word-of-mouth advertising versus like more paid affiliate advertising previously, or a lot of them now is instead of like print media, a lot of them has shifted to digital media, so the costs in like printing or factories are significantly less. And those contribute again to less profit motivation and less of a hunger to getting more money.
Thank you very much, Mika. Government team, your question?
So, if I'm not mistaken, I think the question is how do we ensure that we are objective without the words of... Hello? Is that okay? Yeah, so if I'm not mistaken, it's about how we can ensure that we are objective. And, I don't think we can assert that we will be completely objective. Obviously, I think in both worlds, there will be sexist men occupying newsrooms, and that's very unfortunate. But I think we need to ask ourselves about the outcome of where these men are less damaging. Because I think in a world where you report on race and gender specifically, there is a sexist man writing about rape and stories specifically related to rape. Actually, just this morning, the New York Times, one of the biggest publishers, the most supposed liberal, wrote a ghastly piece about one of Brett Kavanaugh's survivors, something about it was just a fun bit of information and a fun little event. So I recognize we can have the discussions and recognize specific bits of sexual assault in the world of opposition. But if we look at it in reality, these men exist in our world too. The difference is we don't give them the capacity to talk on an issue they don't know anything about first. I think that's why it's good.
All right, thank you very much, and that concludes the Q&A session with the debaters. So first of all, let's give them another round of applause for good debate, great engagement. It's a good conversation we have this weekend. And before we present the token of appreciation, and before I have them sit down with the audience members, I just want to re-engage with the audience on now what they think the opinion should be about this topic. So I just want to roughly gauge. So who here thinks that media practitioners should reference gender, religion, and any other identities when they're reporting? Raise your hands. Hi, all right. Okay, who thinks that they shouldn't reference? Like no identity markers whatsoever? Okay, seems to be about the same, maybe leaning slightly towards referencing. Either way, thank you so much. Good job to the debaters as well. I'd like to invite the debaters to please sit down with the audience before we present tokens of appreciations. Alright, and the Malaysian Institute for Debate and Public Speaking to basically bring to the front issues that impact everyday Malaysian. The theme for this year's Weekend of Knowledge Evolution is Voices of Malaysia. Considering the importance of expression, the importance of information in the 21st century, we wish to unpack a lot of the issues that either limits or surrounds issues regarding to expression and also information. Also my name is Izan from the Malaysian Institute for Debate and Public Speaking. So we have an exciting set of events for this portion of the day. We have a forum which we will later witness that discusses who is killing Malaysian media. We have a keynote speech by one of our partners, the Institute of Journalists Malaysia, and we also have an exciting public debate later on whether we should be referencing gender, race, religion, or any form of identities in the media today. So before we start, I'd like to first invite the Chief Executive Officer of the Malaysian Institute for Debate and Public Speaking to welcome everyone and say a few words. Ms. Emilia Sharif, please welcome.
Hey guys, how are you doing?
Great.
Okay, it's always awkward when I ask a question to the audience and one answered, so I'm glad there's some answered. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about MIDP, what do we do, and like this event, right? What is this all about? So the Malaysian Institute for Debate and Public Speaking, MIDP, is an educational institution that works on the development of human capital in Malaysia. And we do that through the promotion and development of leadership and soft skills. We offer classes as part of our training program to kids as young as 7 years old, all the way to adults. Should I say age, maybe like 50 plus, 40 plus, we still have those age groups within our student pool. We also run external training at schools, universities, and basically also corporates who invite us to maybe teach their salesmen on how to pitch and stuff like that, right? So debating and public speaking is something that is very close to our hearts because to a lot of us debaters, everyone has struggles, right? I was personally a very quiet person, I'm very introverted. I'm definitely not comfortable speaking in front of a large crowd. After an event, I want to go home and not see anyone, you know? But that's the thing about debating, or communication skills, critical thinking and communication skills. These things are skills, they're not talent. And at MIDP, we believe that it can be taught. And especially when you think you're timid or introverted, that's all the more reasons to catch up and learn these skills as you go along. So Weekend of Knowledge Evolution is part of an advocacy program that we do on an annual basis, and the aim is to bring debating out to the public. Because if you know a little bit about the debating community, you will know that we're quite closed, like shy, I don't know. So the kind of things we do over the weekends usually is like quiz night or board game nights with each other. We don't like interact with the public so much. But this is one of the very rare opportunities that debaters in Malaysia have to actually interact with the public and showcase the amazing debaters that we have with us right now. And I'm also very, very glad to tell you that the debates that you will watch later on will feature some of the best debaters, not just in Malaysia, but also in Asia. We have the best speaker in Asia right now. We'll be debating that debate later on, and I hope you'll enjoy the speeches as well. And before I end my speech, I just have to thank Institute of Journalists Malaysia for all the support and all the help, and in particular Chuck, because IOJ and Chuck is not just our partner that advises on things, but Chuck is also our emotional support system. So very, very thankful for all the times that Chuck answered our question when we can't quite figure out what to do with like certain things. So I'm just going to introduce you to the team members in case some of you want to talk to us later on. So here we have Izzat. Izzat is our Business and Development Manager, Business and Operations Manager. And that's Visha over there. At the back we have Wesley. And somewhere is Azim. Okay. If you have questions, you can approach us later on. I don't want to waste any more time. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really, really grateful to see all of you guys here. And let's start with the forum. And I hope you stay until the debate, okay? Don't go back. So we'll have the forum first, and then keynote speech, and then debate. So I hope you stay throughout the entire thing because it will be interesting. Okay, thanks.
Alright, we'll now be proceeding with the forum. For your information, the forum, which is on who is killing Malaysian media, it will be moderated by the chairman of the Institute of Journalists Malaysia, Mr. Chap On Lau. And the panelists will be the following. We have the General Manager of Karang Craft, Mr. Ahmad Nazri. We have an editor of Astro Awani, Ms. Melissa Idris. We have the Senior Editor of the Star Online, A. Asuhan. And lastly, we have the Editor-in-Chief of Malaysia Kini, Mr. Stephen Gunn. And with that being said, I would like to formally invite the panelists as well as the moderator to please take their seat at the front so that we can begin. Alright, and I'll now pass the floor to our moderator, Chuck. Floor's yours.
Thanks everybody. How's everybody doing? Good? Alright, good to hear. Alright, so we're going to keep this panel casual and lively. I think one of the things that I wanted to start off with before asking any of our panelists questions is, out of everybody here, how many people from the media? Oh, okay, not bad, quite a few. Now, the second question, how many people here know that media in general is in trouble? Oh wow, why are we even here? We can go home already. Okay, so with that, now I kind of know what the floor is like. Let me just start off with our panelists with a question that I really wanted before we got on stage. I want you guys to say how many years you've been in the media, and then we'll start with the one who's been in the media the longest. Okay? Asuhan, how many years?
So ages.
How many years?
I'm the oldest here.
But how many years?
Really old.
How many years in media?
Okay, except for 6 years, for 2 years stint in PR, about 30 years now.
30 years. Wow. Okay, Stephen?
25.
25, Melissa?
About 15.
And Nazri?
25.
25, okay, so you and Stephen are tied. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do is very quickly bring you through the 30 years you've been in media, so everyone kind of gets a background of where you've been before.
Oh, okay. Well, I started my career in journalism working for the tech pull-out in the Star. And in fact, the Star Online was a special project within Intech, which was the tech pull-out. So I spent about 18 years there. Then at one stage, I left journalism and joined Microsoft for a couple of years in PR. Missed journalism and went back because, you know, it's a big hassle being able to pay your bills on time. All I decided to go back to do journalism and start studying it. And after a couple of other tech journalists and I, including Karan Jetson from The Edge, we co-founded this tech news portal called Digital News Asia, which is still operating. But in 2016, it sounds like some people to come back to the Star because we are undergoing, like so many other industries, digital transformation initiative. We want to leave it out for that. So.
Right, cool. And Stephen, let me go next after that question.
I started off as a freelance journalist when I was based in Hong Kong. And that's because I wanted to travel around, so I was more or less a backpack journalist. I managed to really visit quite a lot of countries in Asia while earning my keep as a journalist, writing for all sorts of magazines and newspapers and all that. After 4 years, I got tired and decided to come back to Malaysia, join the Sun as the special issue editor, mostly looking after investigative journalism. But of course, after a couple of years, facing quite a number of, quite a lot of censorship, I decided that to go back overseas. I went to Thailand, worked there as an editorial writer for The Nation, which is an English language newspaper, and it was just shut down. So not very good news there.
Yeah.
And I came back again in 1999, similar year. Reformasi demonstration was happening here in Malaysia. In fact, I still remember that Hayes was around, and still around today. Oh God! And Mahathir was around then. Some things don't change really. But anyway, set up Malaysia TV. So that's been we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year in November.
Wow. Thank you. Okay, Nazir, your turn.
Okay, despite being trained in engineering and I did my MBA, I always had the love for literature. So after working for a multinational, in 1993 I founded my own magazine. It's an IT magazine in today. And then it was bought over by Craft in 1999, and I've been there ever since. But I've transitioned from editorial to management.
You did training before as well, right?
Yeah, training during my entrepreneurial years before Craft bought over me.
Okay, finally, Melissa, Age Before Beauty.
Hi everyone, I'm Melissa. I started out as a rookie reporter in Bernama. After a couple of years there, I moved on to do Islamic finance, and then got kind of tired of the journalism scene locally, and I thought, well, I've got newsroom experience now, maybe I need journalism school experience. So I took a break and I went to do my master's in journalism in Australia, came back, and I went, oh no, there are no jobs. I turned on the radio one day and said, hey, this is quite a cool radio station. What station is this? And it was BFM. And I submitted my resume there and ended up working there for 8 years. So I've just recently left BFM at the start of this year and am now an anchor and an editor at Asrawani, where I host a nightly news commentary show as well as a weekly women's empowerment show.
Right, okay, so now that we know all the speakers, let's move on to the first question. And the first one is already quite controversial. We wanted to talk about the quality of journalism today. And since all of you have at least, a few years of experience between all of you, I think, is there a century on here? I think it's including me, there's probably a century of media experience.
How many years of experience do you have, Chip?
Mine is about 18 years.
All right, then, yeah. We're hitting a century.
Okay, so with that, how has the quality of journalism changed in the last 15 to 20 years? Who wants to go first? Anybody? Stephen Gan. Okay, here we go. How has the quality of journalism changed in the last 15 to 20 years?
I think in one sense,
audio issue.
I think in one sense, situation has gone down to a certain extent because of the fact that with online media, you need to be really, really fast. So the attention span is lower. People are writing shorter content and all that. But I would like to differ in a sense that I think we are today producing some of the best journalism. Partly because thanks to technology. Because if you look at Panama Papers, it was a leak of 10 million documents, 2.6 terabytes of data, and yet by using technology we are able to distill information from that into the stories that would actually rock the world to a certain extent, which Malaysian King was part of, and that's great. I think something like that would not happen 10 years ago, for instance, because it's difficult for someone to really. It would take an entire team, perhaps a few years, to really come up with reports of to really distill some of the things and to find the patterns in the documents. So I think in some ways we are doing better journalism today thanks to technology, because we are able to use technology to really find patterns in the massive data that we have. Number one. Number two, also we are able to actually use technology to actually tell our stories better. And it's not just using text, but also graphics, animation, video, everything. So in that sense, I think I'm really, really positive. I think that journalism is still here to stay, and that we will continue to produce good journalism.
Okay, now I'll turn to Melissa. So you've come into you're probably the youngest journalist here, and I assume that when you came in, you had some ideas of what journalism should be.
Oh yes.
And how has that changed now that you've been in the industry?
Well, you have your kind of hero reporters, and you think that you're going to come in and change the world, right? You're gonna come in and make the world a better place. And then when I guess when I started, it was a different landscape, and I've been very lucky because your question was, what has changed in the past 20 years? And that's the entirety of my career in journalism. So the evolution of it, for me personally, has really been the advent of the 24-hour news cycle. So growing up, I would look at the papers as the benchmark for journalism. I would look at the nightly news as, that's where everyone gathered in front of the TV, and that was where you got the news of the day. And then it became this 24-hour news cycle in the last 50 years. And that was at the same time with the rise of social media, where everyone has an opinion. 24-hour news cycle combined with social media just means the speedier dissemination of news. It meant 24 hours, second by second dissemination of news. And while I'm optimistic, like Stephen, that journalism has gotten better because of technology, I also think there have been trade-offs. I think that very minor news have become major news in the age of 24-hour news cycle. I think that perhaps journalists are limited by the time constraints. And also, you're feeding this insatiable monster of news. The hunger for news cannot be sated by anything. And it's just that, I guess that has been the biggest change in the past 15 years.
Sorry, Asaman, turning to you, right? So you were at the start twice, right? You went there, then you had your Vision Quest, you went to Microsoft, DNA and all that, and then you came back. What changed?
Well, because when I left and when I started DNA, we already aware. I agree with you, Lisa. The 24-hour news cycle is really the biggest enemy of journalism. Because we need to get news fast. We don't always have the luxury to do all the things that the proper journalist should do, which is to double, to verify. We do it, right? But it's like really, because by the time drifting out, yeah. By the time we are able to verify information, social media has gone to town with it, and it may not be accurate. And so we feel the pressure to act even faster, right? So that's one issue. What has changed is that when I left, the internet is not killing journalism in the sense that everyone's talking about digital is killing off the newspaper industries. Digital has been around since Malaysia came in, it's now online, it's been more than 25 years. Right? The internet is not mentioned. For me, the two biggest trends in the last few years that is threatening the journalism industry, not just the newspaper industry, but journalists themselves. If you look at all the layoffs that can happen in pure play digital media in the US, it's one, So the two biggest trends is one, media consumption behavior has changed, and that is being driven by number two, the smartphone, right? People want the news here and now. They don't want it long, like Stephen was saying. They want short bits. They don't really, in many ways, they don't want to consume journalism. They want to consume talking points that they can go to the Mama stall or on their social media and talking without actually clicking and reading articles.
Okay, wait. So, ladies and gentlemen, today's topic is who's stealing Malaysian media. We have the first suspect, and the first suspect is you. Okay, go on.
Well, yeah. In fact, it's all of us, but we'll go into that later. But yeah, the media consumption behavior has changed. That's why you have, you see, I like to draw the difference between, say, chili sauce and other curation sites. Chili sauce doesn't just curate, right? So I have to say I'm a big fan of chili sauce as well, right? When an issue happens, they go in deep, right? They will feed off our journalism. They will base the stories on what the media breaks, but they go in a different direction and they do their own journalism around it, and they come up with very engaging articles to help explain things. But you see other curation sites where it's just 2 lines link, 2 lines link, 2 lines link, That's not journalism. That's giving you talking points so you can have a chat with your friends. And anecdotally, I find that very few people click on the links. So it's not like 20 years ago there were curation sites as well, but you usually click. So I'm telling you, you want to save journalism, all of us, because journalism is a very important part of democracy. Don't just read the talking points, click and read the whole articles.
Okay, excellent. Nasri, so we have some really interesting talking points there. Right? So I want to get into the quality of journalism, and also maybe you can go into the difference in consumption of media in the last 20 years. You know, like from when you started to now, how people are consuming. Just shortly before that, how many people here have actually picked up a magazine before? Okay. Yeah, so you used to run a magazine. Maybe you can start with how journalism was like back in the magazine and what it's like today.
Okay. At one time we used to have 35 magazines, printed magazines. And now, after the joint venture with Astro, we have only 10 printed magazines. So from there you can see it has reduced about 70% the printed magazines. But we have websites to replace it, and we're getting more traction that way. So in a way, it's better than before. We have more new visitors, page views, more people who are interested to read. So in that way, it's better than before, because before you have to buy, mainly free. But that is also our challenge, to replace what we lost in the cover price, which was 5 ringgit, 6 ringgit. We lost that, and we don't have a paywall yet, like in Shakini. So we are planning to keep on that. So the challenge now is to serve our audience, but at the same time be sustainable. So that is the challenge that I feel that media organizations must take on and try. Otherwise, just to add on to the other panel's views, what's affecting us is not just the choices, the public choices to read trivial, clickbait articles, but actually it's the algorithm. What they say is the algorithm runs the world. The algorithm runs the social media, and the algorithm rewards the articles that are shared, engage most, like the likes, and those articles tend to be trivial, entertaining, funny, and not intellectual, not educational at all. So I think that's the enemy of the quality media, the algorithm, followed by people who surrender themselves to the algorithm. That would be the second enemy of quality media. They surrender themselves to endless scrolling, and they are being fed by the algorithm. So I would say one is the algorithm, and we know who's behind those algorithms, the Googles, the Facebooks, the duopolies, the internet warfare. So they run the social media now and the internet, followed by people who succumb to the allure of the algorithm, the mindless feeds, news feeds all day long.
So on that point, so basically now you're saying that entertainment and salacious content gets more page views and more shares, which also in a way contributes to the largeness of your site, like effectiveness of advertisers and so on and so forth. Then what kind of thought process do you guys put before saying, I want to publish entertainment or I want to publish something intellectual and journalistic?
If I may refer to Malaysia Kini has a paywall site, but it's in English. But they have a Bahasa Malaysia site which generates lots of page views. So we also, in a sense, use that strategy. We have to have those popular articles. We have to have it. We have to have the necessary or sufficient page views, the unique visitors, which can generate advertising, digital advertising. But we still produce those quality, intellectual, educational, nation-building articles, because it's one of our ethos, which is to be sincere, to be fair, but also to contribute to a better nation, a better tomorrow for all nations. So we are some sort of a social business also, not just profit making. So we have to play both games. the popularity game and the nation building game.
It's sad, but we hope to lure you into good journalism. That's what most newsrooms have to offer, right? Catch you with a sexy story. Hopefully you'll stay on and read the actual news pieces.
Yes. Okay, so Nazri, there was a very, very interesting point just now where you said that you're running a social business, so that it's not driven by profit. Not entirely driven by profit, but driven by some sort of goodwill. You want to do better for mankind. Do you guys agree that journalism has become a social business?
Has become, it's always, I mean, I wouldn't use social business, but it's always been about the foreign estate, right? That's what we're all in here for. I mean, our bosses may think otherwise. I mean, the business owners may think otherwise. They're there. For them, it's the bottom line. Bottom line, that's most important. But for everyone else in a news organization, that's what you're there for.
But do you think that the upper management is driven by profit, or profit plus doing some sort of good for society?
That goes with different newsrooms. I would like to think so, that in ours it's still, you know, we want to do good journalism but make some money out of it so we can pay our people.
Thanks. I think journalism is a calling, right? I think, you know, it is not for those who want to make money. If you want to make money, you go into something else, not journalism. So in that sense, it started that way, and I think media organization has always been set up as such, as a organization that would provide information so that the people or citizens could be better informed, so that they can make better decisions. I mean, you know, that's the whole idea that the democracy is basically, for a vibrant democracy, you need to make sure that voters go to the ballot box to make informed choice. And to do that, you know, is that, you know, they read the news. So I think that's the whole idea. But I think in between, you know, a lot of tycoons and all that, media tycoons and all that, definitely they were drawn into ensuring that media organization make a lot of money. And in 10, 20 years ago, they do. In fact, you know, if you look at some of the big media organizations, they are actually pulling in some of the, you know, in terms of percentage, some of the much bigger than a lot of other companies. So, but not anymore, though. So I think it is really, at the end of the day, that is what journalism is all about, and that's what journalism should inspire to. Well, of course, for, you know, you need to make a profit because, you know, you need to sustain yourself at the end of the day, because otherwise, you know, how are you going to remain independent if you continue to rely on, say, for instance, you know, tycoons to fund you?
If I could just add a little bit on that, but from a different perspective, because they're talking about the perspective of upper management, right? Shareholders making profit. Just to ride on Stephen's point about journalism being a vocation and you won't get paid, as you're not going to make big bucks being a journalist. One of the things I'm seeing as a working journalist in a working newsroom in the past 15 years, and this has been a bit of a concern for me, is the rise of the elite newsroom. Because journalism has become quite an elite profession, because it doesn't pay, what happens is you've got people, young journalists from very elite and privileged backgrounds becoming journalists, young journalists. When I was a rookie reporter, there was a guy with me who had SPM qualification. He didn't have a degree, but he worked the ranks, right? And he rose through the ranks because he was a really hardworking, smart young reporter. But now you have, you know, graduates from Ivy Leagues competing for internships in journalism or in newsrooms with not just local graduates, but people who don't have degrees. Now, what that has kind of created are newsrooms that are homogenous and herd mentality. So that's the kind of trend that I'm keeping my eye on. Newsrooms that don't reflect the diversity that we want to see in our news reporting.
Wow, didn't know about that. People in Ivy Leagues applying.
Yeah, I mean, so when I was in, when I was in BFM, we had great interns, but many of my interns were Ivy League graduates, or in between semesters, and I see a former intern of mine here, who's also from a very prestigious school, Russian, raise your hand. So, you know, the danger is when because we have so few newsrooms, when newsrooms and so few reported jobs, when those jobs are filled by people who are of a certain social class, what kind of reporting are we getting? What happens when the fourth estate is almost indistinguishable from all the other estates that they are watching? What happens if the reporter is the anak of the Tan Sri, of the minister, of whatever, right? We don't want that. We want to be mindful of that.
Yeah, so the first time I'm so proud to be a dropout. But is this a problem with English language newsrooms? I don't think, maybe you can tell us about that.
So Awani is a is a Malay language newsroom, but I am looking after the English belt. It's a crossover because Malaysians are bilingual. So you know, the children of the privileged study abroad, but they are fluent in both languages, in multi-languages. So it's, I think, also in Malay newsrooms as well.
Okay. I do know there was one stage, not so much now, but a few years ago, we used to have the same problem. It's because you have to have the children of the privileged come into the newsrooms, because if you try to make a career out of it, it's not going to pay much. So hopefully mommy and daddy will take care of all the bills.
And that's the thing, right? You are a journalist because you've got a trust fund. You're a journalist because you're not worrying about the bills at the end of the day, because mommy and daddy will pay for it. So the regular folk who are trying to make ends meet don't see journalism as a valid profession, which is a shame.
Right. At Chili Sauce, we have a BM edition as well, and it's run by an ex-Khazanah guy. But he actually took a pay cut. He said it wasn't a pay cut because based on the amount of hours he was working at Khazanah, he earned more per hour at Chili Sauce, apparently.
So you're an elitist newsroom.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, yeah. But he's not Melayu, because Melayu TTDI is a bit different.
That's a different category altogether.
Yeah.
That's an A+ category.
It's not half. Yeah, sure.
I think, really, it really depends on the media organization and mission that it has. Because I know of a lot of journalists who are willing to take pay cuts to join the number of media organizations. And I salute them, really. I think, Malaysia Kini do not pay market rate for many, many years. And yet, we've got all sorts of people joining Malaysia Kini because of mission, because they want to tell the truth, tell truth to power and hold power to count and all that. And it's amazing, really. I think there are people willing to do that. But of course, you cannot not pay them, the proper wages.
Eventually, will come up to you.
Yeah, that's right. Eventually, you need to do that. But I think there are people who are willing to make that sacrifices, and really, I think we should encourage that to a certain extent, because I think really journalism is all about, at least, they're making some sacrifices in order to pursue, our passion.
Can I just say that, it's a Sunday. I'm sure we all have things to do, especially the younger people, but I see so many young people here coming to a talk about journalism and, giving themselves a round of applause. This is very passionate. Also, before we forget, like MIDP, organizing debates, I think part of the conversation is also having a conversation like this. So we can actually analyze our thoughts, find new perspectives, and we need an audience for that. And so thank you so much for coming for this talk today. So moving on, one of the things I want to talk about is when exactly we started seeing this downturn in journalism. Because you said, was it US one or Stephen that said it used to be
about revenue or enthusiasm?
Let's talk financials right now.
Financials? Well, depending on which country you're talking about, it's been happening for about 15 years. I think in Malaysia, it also depends on which media organizations you're talking about. But in the last 5 years, it's been a carnage. To borrow Donald Trump's misused word.
Okay. Yeah. So I happen to know about some things about the Star News team. Can you give us some numbers about how that number has been reduced?
Well, it's we're a public listed company, so the numbers are out there anyway. I know we have very good cash reserves, but in terms of profits,
manpower.
Manpower. We've gone through in the last 2 years, we've gone through 2 rounds of layoffs, right? Mutual separation scheme, and this is in addition to a VSS scheme we had 5 years ago. So our numbers are down tremendously. This is where we also depend on technology, like Stephen was talking, because now we've got fewer people who need to do more, and that's a challenge across newsrooms across the world.
Okay, so let's say we rewind the clock about 5 to 6 years ago. What was the size of the news team covering Malaysia, and today what is it?
Oh, I think we had about 40% more, 50%.
Compared to last time?
Compared to last 5 years ago. Yeah.
So 50% down?
Yeah, in terms of editorial people.
And the amount of content you guys are generating is?
The newspaper is a lot thinner these days. But we're talking to the online guy. That doesn't make a difference. We still produce the same amount of content, right?
I think a lot of public do not really understand, perhaps are not, they don't have the, how to put it, news organization has always been quite profitable for many, many years, thanks to advertising. The companies are willing to actually pay a lot of money to advertise the product or the services, whatever it is. And because of the fact that media organization has almost complete monopoly on dissemination of information, they can actually, pull in quite a lot of advertisement. That has changed. I think the world has changed. Thanks to Facebook, no thanks to Facebook and Google. The reason why that has changed is because media organization cannot compete with these big multi-billion companies because of the fact that we cannot deliver the kind of audience that these guys can promise. I mean, because they know their audience, they know the people much better than us. Because through your likes, through the people that you're talking to, through your searches in your computer, they have profiles of who you are, what's your interest and all that. And they can tell the companies and say, look, if you advertise through us, we're able to deliver you the people that you are looking for. Say you are selling cosmetic, we are able to send you the audience, to give you the audience that will most likely buy your product, not some other people who may not have interest in your advertisement. So I think that's where media organizations like us are not able to actually compete with them, because we do not know our audience as good as they are, because we do not have that kind of technology. So I think increasingly we are losing out to the point where we actually providing space in our website for Google to serve their ads to. They will take a big cut. So companies will go to Google and say, look, I'll pay a certain amount of money, and Google will serve the ads to wherever. It could be blogs, or it could be website, it could be Star, Malaysia Clinic, Harian Metro, whatever it is. And they will take a big cut. They'll take 30-40%. So instead of companies coming direct to us and we earn all the money, it's no longer the case, because Google is earning most of the money without doing anything really, just by
Sorry, quick one.
Just a quick one to add to what Stephen was saying, the economics of the media industry right now. I'm always taken aback when people point at news organizations. See, you guys didn't invest in digital, you all were so dependent on print. No, I'm pretty sure it's the same case with you. We've always been investing in digital. The big difference is, especially in the last 5 years, is all the investments we put into our digital operations. According to estimates, 60 or 80% of the ad revenue go to Google and Facebook. They don't produce any content. They are sucking off our content to make money, and we put in the investment. We do the journalism. We're not seeing it. It's not that we've ignored digital. No, I'm pretty sure. I can't think of any single media company in Malaysia that did not invest millions in digital over the last 15 years. It's not new to us, but we didn't account for the platform companies.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, suspect number 2, Facebook and Google. Okay? Let's keep notes. Nazri, yes?
As for us, things really got back 5 years ago. Before that, we were making money, although not much. But we went from 400 editorial staff to now 200. We went from 8 printed editions for almost all the states in the Peninsular Malaysia to only one national edition, but we still publish 8 editions on the social media and online. So it's been really tough, and also as Asuhan said, we invested a lot on technology, but sometimes the returns is not there. Yeah? Sometimes maybe we got it wrong, maybe it's becomes obsolete, maybe it's not the right technology. So sometimes it's a hit and miss technology-wise. So I feel that one of the prerogatives to make money in media nowadays is to know, master, at least you're aware of the technology stack. Technology stack meaning what your technology is built on, how it's going to evolve in the future, and how that you're going to make money from it, the ROIs from your investment. Otherwise, it's going to be a bleak day. Make the conclusion that I think there's no way to make money from printed media. There's no way. It's a losing battle. It's a losing game. I think within 5 to 10 years, we won't see any printed magazines nor newspapers, especially newspapers. That's the sad truth. But I think our numbers show numbers don't lie. But the challenge is now how to make money online. That's the next challenge, and we need editorial, we need management that understands, like I said, the tech stack, the digital marketing, the content marketing. It's a new ballgame that Mr. Gan said. To know our audience, we need to install what we call data management platform, DPM. We need to install CRM. We need to install various other technologies, and these usually come from the Western world, and they are not cheap. I think, with the exception of Malaysian Kini, they build their own. So hats off to them. But we do not have the expertise, nor the patience. Time is not on our side. So sometimes it's better to just buy off the shelf. But like I said just now, sometimes it's a hit and miss. You don't get the ROI from the investment that you do in technology. Listen?
Just a little bit, because you guys were talking about the profitability of the newsroom, right? So in terms of advertising, if we could look at it from the subscription, because I don't have anything to do with advertising, and that's out of my pay grade to look at advertising, but looking at subscription, and I'm just going to use a personal anecdote. So we've just gotten so used to getting news for free online, thanks, Star Online, but that by the way, just gotten so used to getting free.
Suspect number 3, Star Online.
They almost started with all this free news online, right? But okay, so we've just gotten used to getting free news online, that when the paywalls came up, we went, what? Why do I have to pay for news I can get free off my Twitter feed or my Facebook posts or whatever, right? And I have to say that requires a mindset shift for us news consumers. We really have to get to be okay again with paying for news. Like your parents bought the papers. Every morning you had the newspaper guy delivery guy threw your newspaper under your dad's car. You paid for that. That was paid for. Now so I was just telling Stephen before we started, my personal story is that for the past few years I've been freeloading off my company's Malaysian TV subscription. Right? So I've just been using the mass password to read all the news. And in the last year, I have seen the quality of news that Malaysian TV has put out. I mean, they've just upped the game for everyone in journalism with their special reports and their interacting with data journalism. The Sungai Kim Kim coverage was phenomenal, Stephen. And I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to be a private subscriber. I'm going to pay for good journalism. And I'm a journalist, can you believe that? So I have to say, we have to get used to the concept of paying for what we used to get for free, because everything comes at a cost. Now, you pay for cloud storage. Why can't you pay for good journalism, right? You pay for Spotify streaming, pay now Netflix, or what is wrong with paying, was it 200 ringgit a year for Malaysian TV subscription? That was a free plug, sorry.
Thank you for plugging me for Malaysian TV. Very, very much appreciated.
I'm also a subscriber, so. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the financials. So let's change cogs a little bit and let's talk about how it's affecting your coverage. Okay? Because we talked about the 24-hour news cycle. So we want it fast, we want it cheap. That what's got to give? Something's got to give, right? So Nasri, maybe you can start with this one.
Okay. We have less editorial staff now, so that's a challenge.
How much less?
Half.
Half. So about the same. Both
Yeah.
you guys about the same.
Half, yeah.
Where do these journalists go?
Some probably grab.
Some join the government, I hear. Yes, that too. Yes. Okay, sorry.
I personally have not felt our quality have dropped because we equip our staff with the latest gadgets, technology, workflows. We try to convert our newsroom to digital first, mobile first. We try to get help from other news sources where we cannot do coverage. We buy the stories. So to me, our reporting has not suffered. We have always turned out the same quality of articles, features. But of course, we can always do better with more staff. So to me, we have to accept the fact that journalists have to do more. They have to be video journalists, photojournalists. So we have to live with it. I think quality shouldn't suffer.
So everyone just has to do more and work harder.
Do more and work harder.
For less pay.
Yeah, and
Wow.
especially for online, it's almost 24 hours around the clock. From home, from the bathroom. Anyway, I just went to study fast.
Who wants to be a journalist? Oh, yay! Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wow, this is like lalang in my garden. 7.
Just to add to what I said. So it's not just the number of people you reduce, but for many national news organizations doing mainstream news, especially, who cover everything, we have to close down bureaus. So if something happens in Kedah, for instance, you don't Alostar, you don't have someone on the ground anymore. You have to recall someone from another city to go there, right? So a perfect example was the Irish girl who got lost, right? Do you have the numbers? Can you send a full team there? Things were happening every day. There were briefings. You don't have a full team. Some news organizations decided, okay, we will send a few people, have a full crew there. So they wrote all the stories much faster than news organizations that were struggling because it costs money to do journalism, right? And Melissa is right. I think every news organization in Malaysia, especially in the last 2 years, have actually discussed putting up paywalls. Whether they do or not, we don't know. Some have said they're going to, but then decided not to, but to KID for a while. But I think it's going to happen. Journalism costs money, and you guys are going to have to pay for it sooner or later.
But it's if I understand the dynamic correctly, it's kind of like a game of chicken right now, right? Everyone's looking at each other going like, who's going to do the paywall first? Because if you do it first, then I'll get the page views, and then my advertisers will pick up. That's okay, so that's correct. Okay, Stephen, what do you think about how the lack of resources has affected journalism and the 24-hour news cycle and the public diets?
For those who want to be journalists, really, I salute you. I think it's not an easy job. You need to be always switched on. Maybe 24 hours in that sense. Just as our audience expect us to deliver news 24 hours. So I think it requires special species to really for someone who can do well as journalists. It's not for everyone. So in that sense. But that said, I think a lot of media organizations tend to, they get tempted to actually go for clickbait. I think in order to grow audience and all that. And the easiest way to look at the most read news is always sex and crime. I think
incest always gets high.
Yeah, something like that.
Incest, I don't know what it is.
I think for Malaysia, Guinea, we are fortunate in the sense that we are a social political news site. We do sex and crime as well, but you know, it's sex videos and IMDb scandal and all that. A lot of corruption. Yes, that's right. I mean, you know, so that's enough, you know, for us to actually satisfy our audience. But I think, you know, really, while we need to ensure that we deliver, you know, the news on time and all that as quick as possible, but at the same time, I think there is still audience out there who appreciate longer pieces, more in-depth pieces, people like Melissa and all that, which we try to do every now and then. I think that is important, and if you can find a mix of that, I think you can do pretty well.
Okay, so I have a lead-on question there, Stephen, sorry. With regards to the coverage that Melissa talked about, your data journalism, your heartbreaks of news about the Bangladeshi deaths, how much traction does that get versus, you know, Najib eye infection?
You're right. I think you know, Najib eye infection or Najib about, you know, the fact that he's complaining about the seat is not good enough, is causing him, you know, the hernia or whatever it is. That's always been, you know, it's just the way it is. I think, you know, people tend to attract to that kind of news. But I think, you know, at the end of the day, really, you need to also provide, you know, the in-depth information. And and there still be audience for it, rather than we focusing on just delivering, you know, sort of sexy news to our audience.
Can I just add a little bit
sure.
to that? Just, it's supply and demand, right? We can supply great quality, but what does it matter if no one cares about it or reads it? I was at a forum once, and someone said something that made me want to cry. This person said, works in a newsroom, said, if the news article is not being shared, is it even worth writing? And I was so disheartened by that comment, and I thought to myself, well, if you're going to write something that is just for the sake of, you know, readers to share, then what kind of journalism is that? It is journalism that is baiting on your emotions, right? It is journalism that feeds on fear and anger and smugness and distrust. And is that really what we want to read? So I would say that as much as quality journalism is, you know, desired, quality news consumption is also important. When you are the demand, when we are the supply. So you have to demand for good things. You can't just click on the incest and the racial polarization and the boycott of this and that and Najib's eye infection. You have to also want to consume things that make you smarter, that makes you more talented, that makes you a better citizen. So it really is up to not just journalists, but also news consumers.
Okay, sorry, I have a counterpoint to that, in the sense that I actually had a conversation with your colleague Shara. Was Shara here? Yeah, Shara was here. Shara Kutan. Are you in the audience? Oh, you tell me. Okay, I see. Okay. So I had a conversation with Shara when he was with BFM on this very topic, in saying that yes, you should write something even though it's not something that people are inherently interested in. But if no one reads it, is it really getting out there? And should we be doing more to try and sell it to our audience?
I think you'll find that most news organizations are aware of that. That's why many of them pay attention to social media, although we don't like to. Social media is a way of broadcasting your stories, right? I have just two anecdotal bits of data to add to it. It just happened that late last week we were reviewing our numbers, and we found that in the last 3 months, the most read story, and you know, the Star covers everything, including sex, violence, and stuff like that, right? Was a political story. Unfortunately, it was an Nazmin Ali sex video story. So, second is the
so it's a political sex story.
The best kind of political story. But
fusion food.
Yeah, but there's another thing is because, and I've seen it with some media bosses as well. Everyone talks about the numbers, and the great thing about digital is you can get actual data on how many people reading your stuff at any one time, right? But they tend to look at very short-term views. So we've also noticed, for instance, that if you go by the daily or the weekly most read stories, it's going to be of the clickbait-ish kind. But if you stretch over a period of 3 months or 6 months, you find that the long form, more analytical pieces, they may not be number one, they may not be the most strikingly read stories, but they tend to do well as well. So like the Star's Rage team, the Sex and Predator, even after 3-4 years, people are still reading that stuff.
That's the Sex and Predator.
Yeah, but then we did, the Rage team did a fantastic listing on foreign students coming here as well. So it did shoot up charts when it was first aired or published online, but there's consistent consumption of those articles, so that there is still a lot of economic value as well beyond the journalism in producing very thoughtful pieces and doing investigative journalism.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you guys have not heard of Rage, basically it's the video investigative arm of the Star. We have one of the most award-winning teams out there running Rage right now. So if you guys have never heard of it, please go and check it out. It's amazing, amazing stuff. They wait like months for a break, and they go over across other countries to track stories. Maybe you can just very, very quickly explain to us how that makes financial sense.
Well, it doesn't. This is one of the things that you as a news organization do because it's important. Although I have to say, in the last year and a half, they have been paying, the Rage team led by Ye Mi, have been paying more attention to making themselves more financially sustainable. They've got some great ideas, they've done various things. But I wonder if they could have done it if it was an independent unit that was not heavily financed from a big media organization. But now they are by themselves, they can do it already. But the first couple of years, it requires tremendous amount of investments in terms of resources. I mean, you may think that, right, it's just, you're not doing work, there's opportunity costs lost. There's the stuff that you have to pay salaries for months with no story coming in view. I mean, actually, they did other things as well, but this is the main focus. So you need a big media organization kind of set up, or a very tightly planned one like Malaysian, what we did with the Panama Papers and all that. You can dedicate resources to it.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left, so we'll ask last 2 questions, and then after that, we're going to open it up for Q&A from the public. How many minutes of Q&A do we have later? 10-15 minutes, so maybe about like 4 to 5 questions, so rush for the mics, guys. Okay, so last 2 questions. Second last question is, what do you wish the public knew about media today?
What the public should know is that we are at the edge of the cliff. At the edge of the cliff. You can fall either way, as you can see from the Utusan episode saga. We almost closed. So same thing with us. I can say we closed 7 editions. From 8 edition, printed edition, to 1 edition now. And we have retrenched half of our editorial staff. So I hope that the public can support us, advertise with us, buy our subscription when we put up the paywall. And good journalism takes effort and money. And if we die, then all you're left with are the clickbaity, the frivolous, the entertaining, the funny videos. The less informed will feel they are informed. But unfortunately, you don't know what you don't know. So to be informed, you have to seek out those organizations like what you have in front of you and follow them, and subscribe to them. And also, don't forget Sinaharia.
What do I wish the public knew about the media business? I think one of the things that journalists take for granted is, we kind of live and die on our deadlines, right? We just set our watches to deadlines, and that's how we live our lives. I don't think anyone else normal, like regular people live like that. The people don't live on deadlines. And with news, it used to be a daily deadline that you set your watch to. But in a 24-hour news cycle, there is no deadline. Every second is a deadline, because every second someone wants a new headline in their Twitter feed, right? So that limits considerably what a journalist can do given those constraints. And everything that we talked about, and I hope that this kind of informs you when you read something or when you watch something or listen to something, that you think about what it takes to put out that piece of news, right? It is not just a headline. There wasn't just one person sitting in front of a computer writing that headline. It was, for instance, in BFM, half an hour of talk meant a week of preparation. So before I did an interview with the minister, I would sit and research that for hours on end, and that was on my own time, not the time that I was on air. So, I guess there are constraints to the journalism that we put out, and for you to be mindful of that when you consume the news, because sometimes you go, hey, how come they didn't talk to all the stakeholders? You try and get all the stakeholders to talk to you when you have a 2-hour deadline. It's tough. So I just want the public to be mindful of that when they are consuming.
Thank you. Stephen?
Taking on from what Melissa said, I think definitely it is for journalists or for media organization per se, it's really, really hard for us to plan. I mean, at the end of the day, we would work out some of the events that's going to happen the next day, who to send and all that to cover those events. What is likely that we would like to follow up, some news stories today that we want to follow up tomorrow, all that. I mean, there's some measure of planning there, but a lot of time when there's a news break, everything goes yeah. I mean, it's just, basically you have to start anew. You have to reorganize your journalists, move them elsewhere. I have, sometimes we have a situation where we have a journalist on the way to cover an event, and midway through, we would call that person and say, look, forget about this, go somewhere else, because something happened. And that happens like that. So you have a situation where journalists who are mindset already set that I'm going to cover this event, I'm going to interview these people, these are the questions I'm going to ask, and this is more or less what I'm going to do for today. But then suddenly, just like that, that person will be doing something else, and it's completely unplanned for. So for us, it's like that really, and business is really a situation where, after the end of the day, the next day you'll be completely doing something really, something different. It's not like you're making washing machine. You can plan, in terms of, tomorrow we're going to do more or less the same thing, right? But not in journalism. Really, every day is different. And just make it a lot more exciting, makes it a lot more interesting, but there is a lot of uncertainty that goes on in journalism. And as I said, it requires, the people who are flexible enough to be able to reorganize their thoughts and the mindset to really be good journalists.
So many things. So many things. So to the few young people who said they want to be journalists and all that, this may sound very disheartening and discouraging, but I'll tell you one thing. It's a crappy job, but it's a beautiful calling, right? It's fantastic. Your pay will be, and Stephen has just given you the kind of things that everyone does. There's a reason why I went back into journalism after making really good money with a US multinational. And it's also a reason I still remember May 9th, or rather May 10th last week. And when that change in government happened, and all I could do was sit back and say, oh my God, I'm so glad I'm in a newsroom today. There's no feeling of that. You were the first ones with the news. You saw, you witnessed history right before your eyes, and you were part of that history. And I'm sure Malaysia, everyone was, it doesn't matter whether you're pro-BN or pro-Pakatan or whatever, you were there when history was being made. Very few other professions give you that, right? So don't be discouraged. Second is, we're talking about who's killing Malaysian media. We spoke about everyone else. The other party that has to take responsibility is the government. We have very repressive media laws in this country. In the previous session, I don't know what the debate was about, but at the end of it, the crowd were asked to vote whether the government should be allowed to control the press, and 80% of the audience said yes, right? This is what's going to kill journalism, folks, right? There may be reason you can ask for a responsible press, but you do not need repressive laws to get responsibility. There are enough laws in this country even without the Printing and Publications Act. And third, we journalists ourselves, right? So, not all of us do a great job. Not all of us are really driven to be really great journalists. And sometimes we don't fight the fights we need to, we back up from battles we need to fight. So that's the other party that's guilty of it, right? I mean, I agree with Stephen, the first question. Journalism, I think there's still great quality, good quality journalism, but we need to be stronger on our side as well, right? And it's a battle. The final thing I like to say, I mean, just to say, there are always fights. You guys don't know it because you think it's a single organization, we come up with one point of view. The number of fights we have in the newsroom, you wouldn't believe it. I'm so surprised because when I get into the mode, I use a lot of profanities. I'm here in a public place, so I can't speak what I call my newsroom language. There's a lot of cussing, there's a lot of cursing that goes on in any newsroom. We're not united, but we are a team, right? In the end, we all believe in what we're doing. We have different points of views, we fight. Finally, you guys want to keep journalism alive? Don't get your news articles via your social media feeds. Go back to the old style, 10, 15 years ago. You like a news website, bookmark it, go there directly. Do not pass Go, do not pass Google, do not pass Facebook. Go to the news site directly. Help us keep journalism alive.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, actually, without that summarizes the last question I had, which were how journalism contributes to society and Malaysia Day and all that. So I think Azuman ended it brilliantly already. So I would like to close off the panel since we're running out of time now. Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause for our panelists. And we would like to open up the floor for questions now. First hand up. Oh, wow, that was fast. Okay, this over there. Yeah, so can you, we'll pass the mic around. Sorry. There's a wireless mic, yeah. So I'll share this mic with you guys. Please say who you are, where you're from, what your question is, and who is directed to.
Hi, I'm Kwani, I'm from PJ. I would like to ask how things has changed after the change of government in Malaysia, especially pertaining to the news industry. Thank you.
Who would like to go first?
Steve. I think it's been pretty good. I think we have a government that at least recognize, hopefully, recognize the need for press freedom. Immediately after the change of government, the media industry, Malaysia TV plus a few others, we came together and we came up with a proposal to come up with a media council. The whole idea behind this media council is that the industry will self-regulate itself. It will handle public complaints. That it will look at, it will ensure that there is a code of ethics that all journalists must abide to, and all that. And at the same time, when this council is set up, the government is required to repeal all the laws that has been used or has been used to restrict the media. So that is the whole deal that is in the process. I think the Information Minister Gobind Singh has already committed himself to implement this, hopefully by the end of this year. So when that happens, hopefully some of the laws that has been used to restrict the media would be either amended or repealed. And then you will have an independent media council that would handle complaints from the public.
Yeah, so it's a big deal, but okay. Newsrooms, I feel especially in the mainstream organizations, we are a lot more energized. It's very thrilling to be a journalist right now. There's more freedom, but there's no absolute freedom. we still get calls, we still get reminders by the whole ministry. So it's not that we are allowed to do our jobs completely free of any political regard. We still get complaints by, I mean, you will see some ministers making making attacks on certain media organizations still. So that still goes on. But it's really a big difference from more than a year ago.
Okay, very quickly from myself as well as a publication owner is that a lot of the times people think that the conversation is about freedom of speech. But one of the things that I would like the public to know is that the conversation among journalists in the last 5 years, even under the previous government, was more about survival than freedom of speech. Freedom of speech was definitely part of the conversation, but in terms of a daily, you talk to someone else about it, it's not so much about whether or not you're going to get imprisoned or whether or not you're going to get fired.
Okay, sorry to drag the mic across the chat. Just my own personal take, and I'm not going to assign this to any particular newsroom. I've only been at Wani for about 6 months, but I was with BFM for 8 years before that. And the difference between the new government has been far less calls from MCMC, far less visits to, to investigating officers and calls from PMO's office. But the one thing, just to write off Asahan's point was, and Stephen's point was also that we may have changed government, but that doesn't mean the mentality has changed by the people in office. So while the previous government felt like they could control the narrative of the media, this new government also has learned from that. So now that they're in power, they think, oh, but maybe I can do something to shape the narrative in the way that the previous administration had done. So the idea is, I guess, for newsrooms around the world, media organizations to kind of change that mindset, to listen, to say, listen, you may be in power. While you're not calling us up or issuing memos and notices, you cannot use moral suasion from bosses or whatever to say, we don't like that story, we don't like that headline, we misquoted, this is our context. You can't do that anymore. I think the new Pakistan government has to learn that how to use the media well and how to be friends with the media to get their message across.
We jumped up 22 places in the World Press Freedom Index since the last G14. So that's an indication of the press freedom given to us, and especially on the press. But however, on the online, I think not much different before or after the G14. Because we in Sinaharan have always pushed the envelope. We've always liked to think ourselves as being neutral, fair, and just. So I think on the press, on the print, more freedom now. But on the online, I think there's always been quite free. Thanks.
Okay, next question. Yes,
sorry, before that, can we see like a show of hands of how many questions we have total? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So maybe we can take turns answering the questions.
Take turns, okay, yeah. Alright, so not everybody answer every question. If you have a preferable person to answer the question, do let us know as well. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the engaging conversation. My name is Arif, formerly with Awani and also the ASEAN Post. I'll be short-lived. This question is probably for Stephen. The fact that every day is different, right? We cover different kind of topics when it comes to news. I remember my experience was that I had to cover a sporting event one day and the next day was I had to go to court. So my question is with regards to how do you kind of fight the struggle to not be desensitized with data and information and looking at people as just statistics. Thank you.
Up to you.
I think one by one, because otherwise then it's quite difficult. Yeah.
I do not have an answer to that question. I think really is up to the journalist concerned. But of course, as a journalist, you need to remind yourself all the time that this is our job. Really, to have empathy for the people that we are reporting on, and you just have to keep reminding yourself that that's the only way to get around it.
Okay, next question.
Hi, Fadli here. Just came by from lunch. So I think I agree that technology plays a big role in the current change of how consumers approach the media. But however, is it not true also that the content is also more important in getting more people to consume your media? So I think most of the time we see what being discussed is on the surface level, I think. So I think we are lacking things like hard topic, hard issue, like the principle, root of thing being discussed. So these are deemed as sensitive, too controversial. So do you think these are what people want and they cannot get? So that's why they don't take media seriously.
Okay, let me just clarify the question there. I'll try to shorten it. You're saying
do you think we are lacking this kind of content? That's why we don't have enough consumption.
Okay, Aswan, why don't you take this one?
The numbers show that's not true. I mean, all of us, all our reporters are very deep, analytical, very brave stories, and the numbers are not there. Not enough people read those. It's, like I said, it's the most popular story in the last 3 months was Nazmin Ali sex abuse. So that's it. There is actually, if you go to any news website, any of the credible news websites in Malaysia right now, I think you'll find that content you're looking at is just not up there. It's not being fed into your social media feeds and all that. But the content is there. You just need to explore it more. We try to present them on our home pages, but it's not getting picked up and said. I think all of us are doing great journalism. My competitors in investment, there are great stories out there, they're just not being read.
So I just want to add a little bit to that. So you mentioned technology, right? What you also don't realize, and we touched on this a bit earlier, is that the algorithm determines what comes up first on your feed. So if you are clicking on sex stories and crime stories instead of institutional reform, those stories come out in your feed, and that's why you're probably thinking, why are there no discussions about institutional reform and the root of corruption and philosophical discussions about, education and all that? It's really what you click the most, and that's how technology and the algorithm works.
One more question?
Yeah, next question.
Hi, my question is directed primarily to Melissa, but also to the rest of the panel. As someone who's been in radio as well as lately TV, I think you've noticed in the past 10 to 15 years, especially in the West, a lot of news or media is gravitating more towards like polarizing or partisan views, so like Fox News, for example. Do you think then that the media should then, in terms of like revenue or whatever, should start gravitating more towards more polarizing partisan views rather than trying to appeal towards the middle, which I think is, not many people like the middle, but there are very much partisan people who are willing to pay to find information that they think supports their views.
Wow, thanks for that. All right.
Sorry, Melissa, before that, he says his question is related. It's just want to add a little bit.
Do you think media should have a stance in reporting? Is it correct, or rather, is it possible to have a neutral media? Thanks.
Wow, okay, both really excellent questions. Actually, I would like Melissa to answer and then Nazri as well. Yeah, definitely.
I'll keep it quite brief as well. I think one of the things that we need to be clear about is there is a difference between reporting the news and commentating on the news. Okay, there's commentary and there's reportage. So when you're reporting the news, you need to be absolutely objective. You need to present the facts, you need to present all sides of the stories to the best of your ability. And when you're reporting the news, everyone, reporters included, has biases, right? So I've been trained to report against my bias. If I'm biased a certain way, I report against my bias when I'm reporting the news. When it comes to commentary, that's a different thing. In the age of the trillion channel news choices, you can pick whatever news outlet you want that feeds into or I guess affirms your worldview, right? You can choose Fox if you lean that way, you can choose CNBC if you lean the other way, and it just affirms your worldviews and that your worldviews. So I think that most media organizations have discovered if they want to be different, they have to be media with a point of view, media with a bias or a stance or a slant. And while that may color the commentary of the news, a good newsroom will not let it color the daily reportage of reporting, or the daily news reporting. And I think news consumers need to make that distinction between what is your daily bulletin, your daily news article, what is reporting facts, and those that is commentary, those that are commentary. And then if you so want to read something that affirms your worldview, go ahead and read something that affirms your worldview. But if you want to be a better person, my advice is once in a while, go read something outside of your echo chamber, just to make you a whole-rounded person. Once in a while, go and see what passes up to you, what Harakah is saying, just once in a while. And it actually makes you a better person. So I think that is literacy awareness, media literacy. And when it comes to journalists, I think most good newsrooms keep the biases out of it. So I hope that answers your questions.
Nasri?
I concur fully with Melissa. And I can also add that there's no fully or 100% neutral media organization. There's always somebody who will say, there's always an editor, there's always a person writing it, and that person is one way biased or one way or another. Even in news reporting, I may add, you can report on something, you cannot report on something. So that itself is bias. Which story do you put on your homepage? That itself is bias. So I concur with Melissa, you've got to read from many sources. Seek those sources, the left, the right, the center, the conservative, the liberal. Make up your own mind. I think that's the best way to get the truly rounded, holistic view of the story.
So just to share, at Chili Sauce also, we try to have some sort of balance, but we're always, biased in our own directions. So what I actually did was I got a friend to add me into a BN chat group, WhatsApp chat group. So I get to see, it's so much fun. You guys should just try it, if you guys are not in the BN chat group. You actually get a lot of scoops, so we got a few scoops actually from that BN chat group. I'm not going to say which one it is, in case any of the members here to kick me out after this. But yeah, like they said, seek the other view. It's really, really important. It'll make you a better person. Sorry, next question.
Hello, my name is Lisa. I'm from UiTM Dengkil. So, as aforementioned, right, we have media laws and so on and so forth. So, how do you proofread as editors, especially those articles who are very controversial and sensationalized, especially in our current media? Thank you.
Okay, actually the person who can answer that is right in front of you. His name is Yu Huang, so he's the editor of Ask Legal. But anyway, I'll answer on his behalf. Do you want one particular person here to answer, or anybody? Okay, so I'll give it to Stephen. No? Melissa. Okay, I'll give it to Melissa. Huh? Okay, so our view is that the more controversial it is, the more you have to stick to the facts, right? So basically, if you're talking about the 4 R's, okay? Race, religion, royalty, Rosma, you have to stick to the facts, okay? Yeah, you don't go outside of the facts, because the more you go outside of the facts, that's when it gets dangerous. Whereas on something casual, like, social media, whatever, then you can afford a little bit of commentary. Sorry,
I just want to add also, so not just the sensationalized part, but sometimes this is where diversity in newsrooms and in the upper management of newsrooms is important. It's important to have women as editors in newsrooms, because sometimes men can see a headline and not hear the tone of it, right? It's important to have different races in your editorial leadership, so that what may feel like you may be tone deaf to certain things that other people are more sensitive about. So this is where diversity plays a huge role. And if you look at some newsrooms and you see the same kind of homogenous class, it's a problem. So I think that's where we have to also be quite mindful about.
Oh, you see sex, All right, next question. I think we have time for maybe, 2 more questions, maybe? One more, last question.
Thank you. Right. Hi, Nishan from Amnesty International Malaysia. My question is about, I had it in my head now to formulate it. A lot of what was spoken today, I think, is really directly with my question. We were talking just now about algorithms, and then we were talking about headlines that are sensationalized, that is clickbait, and so on and so forth. In the past year, since the change of the government, we've seen a lot of stories that have been sensationalized, particularly to minority groups such as LGBTI people, migrant issues, refugees, and so on. And when one news comes out, it's just like a wildfire of sensationalized narrative that may be derogatory and discriminating. Therefore, my question is, do you think that the media, especially editors, journalists, and writers, require training to write these kind of stories, and specifically maybe from these grassroots communities? Thank you.
Wow. Okay, who's going to take that one? Okay, Stephen, here.
Definitely we need training. I think we need training in a lot of things. That would be one of those issues that we need to engage in. I just want to say this. The reason why people were shocked that Donald Trump managed to win was because most of the media at that time did not report much or ignore the fact that there is actually a right wing, an ultra right wing in the United States. And I think Malaysia is just as divided, like it or not. And I think that they are liberals on one side and then they are really conservative on the other side. What media should do is hopefully to provide a platform for all these different views to come together and discuss those issues. I think we need to be, for those who are liberal, for instance, they need to be alerted about the fact that there are people who do not share and who are completely very different from them in their views. And they think that these are views that are completely politically incorrect or whatever it is. But fair enough, yes, they are politically correct, but they cannot be ignored because even the mainstream media ignore all those reports, all those news. Social media is already doing it, and that is what happened in the United States because Donald Trump did not have to rely on mainstream media to report about all this. Social media is doing it for him. So I think increasingly mainstream media has lost its monopoly in a sense. Social media has ended that, and we will need to, increasingly, it's not just up to the journalists, it's not up to the media organization to fight this fight. Increasingly, it's every one of you. You need to understand that there are people, there are Malaysians who do not share your views, and you need to counter that. You need to counter that every time because if you don't do it, there are other people doing it. These are the people who do not believe in an inclusive Malaysia. These are the people who do not believe in protecting human rights. These are the people who do not believe in protecting the environment. These are the people who do not believe in the fact that we should leave the world better than the one we inhabit. So you have to fight it yourself.
Okay, excellent. Okay, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I know there are a lot more questions that we have to explore today, but thankfully, immediately after this panel, there's actually a debate with some of the best debaters in the country, actually talking about who's killing Malaysian media. So do stick around for that. But in the meantime, the Institute of Journalists Malaysia would like to thank MIDP and the Weekend of Knowledge Evolution, and of course our brilliant panelists today for discussing and finding out these suspects about who's killing Malaysian media. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Have a good evening. Have a great Malaysian Day tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the moderators as well as the panelists. Please give them another round of applause. Alright, before we pass the token of appreciations, please, the panelists and moderator, you may take your seats in the audience. And for the rest of you all, please do not forget that we have a debate after this. I highly recommend that you stay back and watch the debate after. This is after the keynote speech by the chairman of the Institute of Journalists Malaysia. Alright, so before we proceed with the keynote speech, we would like to present tokens of appreciation to the panelists as well as the moderators. And with that, I would like to invite the CEO of MIDP, Mr. Media Sharif, to pass the token of appreciations. Alright, and we would like to start off with the Editor-in-Chief of Malaysia TV, Mr. Stephen Gunn.
That was a piece of the Salasin.10 podcasterium. It is hoped that you have enjoyed it. If you have any issues, please feel free to leave a comment through any of the channels. That was a piece of the Salasin.10 podcasterium. It is hoped that you have enjoyed it. If you have any issues, please feel free to leave a comment through any of the channels.